A poor girl tries to buy a gift in a luxury store, but the saleswoman humiliates her. Then a millionaire watches everything, and what he does next shocks everyone. If you enjoy our content, consider subscribing to the channel. Your story starts now. The snow fell silently outside the cracked window of the small apartment on Elm Street, each flake catching the dim glow of streetlights before disappearing into the gathering drifts below. Inside, 8-year-old Lucia Martin sat cross-legged on the worn wooden floor, carefully counting the coins spread before her on a faded dishcloth. 25, 26, she whispered, her breath forming small clouds in the chilly air. Her fingers, red and chapped from the cold, moved methodically from one coin to the next. 42, 43. The apartment was quiet except for the occasional creaking of old pipes and the soft, labored breathing coming from the bedroom down the narrow hallway. When she reached the final coin, Lucia's face brightened with a small, determined smile. She gathered the coins into a small cloth pouch and pulled the drawstring tight. $67.35, she announced to the empty room, clutching the pouch to her chest. It had taken her 4 months to save this amount, collecting bottles from the park, helping Mrs. Peterson with her groceries, sweeping the floor at Mr. Garcia's corner store, and doing countless other small jobs around the neighborhood. 4 months of work, for what most people might spend without a second thought. But to Lucia it was everything. She slipped the pouch into the pocket of her thin jacket and tiptoed to her mother's bedroom door, pushing it open just enough to peek inside. Eleanor Martin lay asleep on the bed, her once vibrant face now pale and drawn, dark circles beneath her eyes. A plastic medication organizer sat on the nightstand, alongside a half-empty glass of water and a dog-eared paperback novel. Lucia watched her mother's chest rise and fall with each breath. The doctors had explained that the autoimmune disease attacking Elena's body would keep her bedridden for weeks, maybe months. The medical bills had quickly depleted their meager savings, and the rent was already 2 weeks overdue. But tomorrow was Elena's 36th birthday, and Lucia was determined to give her mother something special, something to make her smile. Again, to remind her that there was still beauty in the world. On the dresser sat a magazine Elena had been reading before she fell ill. Lucia had seen her mother lingering over a page featuring a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a swallow, a symbol of hope and renewal according to the caption. Elena had sighed, trailing her finger over the image before closing the magazine with a wistful smile. "That little bird means freedom," she had told Lucia. "My grandmother used to say that swallows carried our dreams on their wings." Lucia had memorized the name of the store printed beneath the photograph, Bellamy and Rhodes, the most exclusive jewelry boutique in the city. Tomorrow she would go there and buy her mother the pendant, or at least something similar that her savings could afford. A sudden fit of coughing from the bed made Lucia step back into the hallway, not wanting to disturb her mother's rest. As she closed the door, she felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. Tomorrow she would enter a world she had only glimpsed through the windows of passing buses and glossy magazine pages, a world of luxury and privilege that seemed as distant from her life as the stars above the city skyline. But for her mother, Lucia would be brave. For her mother, she would find a way to bring home a piece of that beautiful, glittering world. The morning dawned cold and bright, sunlight reflecting off the snow-covered streets with blinding intensity. Lucia had barely slept, her mind filled with dreams of the journey ahead. She dressed in her best clothes, a faded blue dress that Elena had purchased from a thrift store last spring, thick wool tights with only one small hole at the knee, and her only pair of shoes, scuffed brown boots that pinched her toes but kept most of the snow out. She made breakfast for her mother, oatmeal with the last of the cinnamon, and helped her take her morning pills before explaining that she needed to run an errand. "On a Saturday morning?" Eleanor asked, her voice weak but her eyes sharp with concern. "Where are you going, mi vida?" "It's a surprise," Lucia replied, trying to sound casual as she adjusted her mother's pillows. "Mrs. Peterson asked me to help her organize her magazines. She's paying me $5. It wasn't entirely a lie. Mrs. Peterson had indeed offered her $5 for help with organizing her apartment last week, but Lucia had already completed that task and added the money to her savings. Eleanor's forehead creased with worry. Take my scarf at least. It's freezing out there. Lucia nodded and retrieved the soft blue scarf from her mother's dresser, wrapping it around her neck. The familiar scent of her mother's lavender perfume clung to the fabric, giving her courage. I'll be back before lunch, she promised, kissing her mother's forehead. Try to rest, okay? The journey downtown required 2 bus transfers. Lucia sat quietly by the window on each ride, watching as the neighborhoods gradually transformed around her. Run-down apartment buildings gave way to tidy townhouses, which eventually yielded to gleaming skyscrapers and upscale boutiques. By the time she stepped off the final bus, she felt as though she had traveled to another country entirely. Fifth Avenue stretched before her, its sidewalks cleared of snow and lined with elegant storefronts decked in holiday finery. Well-dressed people hurried past carrying shopping bags from designer stores, their faces flushed with cold and the excitement of the approaching holiday season. Lucia clutched her coin pouch tightly inside her jacket pocket and checked the small paper where she had written the address of Bellamy and Rhodes. According to the magazine, it was located between Madison and Fifth in the heart of the luxury shopping district. As she walked, trying to avoid bumping into hurried shoppers, Lucia became increasingly aware of how out of place she looked. Her worn boots left small puddles of melted snow on the immaculate sidewalk. Her coat, a hand-me-down from a church donation bin, was frayed at the cuffs and missing a button. Several passers-by gave her curious or concerned glances, and one woman in a fur coat actually stepped aside as Lucia approached, as though afraid the girl's poverty might be contagious. But Lucia kept her head high, remembering her mother's words. Your worth isn't determined by what you wear or what you own, but by the kindness in your heart and the courage in your spirit. When she finally spotted the elegant gold lettering of Bellamy and Rhodes on a corner building, Lucia paused to catch her breath. The boutique occupied the ground floor of a stately limestone building, its windows displaying velvet-draped stands adorned with glittering jewelry that caught the winter sunlight. 2 uniformed doormen stood sentinel at the entrance, opening the heavy glass doors for customers who approached. For a moment, Lucia's courage faltered. Perhaps this had been a foolish idea. Perhaps she should have gone to one of the department stores instead, where she might have found something more affordable. But then she thought of her mother's face when she had looked at the swallow pendant, the rare moment of joy in weeks of pain and worry, and her resolve returned. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her shoulders and marched toward the entrance, ignoring the surprised expressions of the doormen as they reluctantly opened the door for the small, shabbily dressed girl. The interior of Bellamy and Rhodes was more magnificent than Lucia could have imagined. Crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling, painted with delicate gold patterns. The floors were polished marble that reflected the warm lighting from above. Glass cases displayed trays of rings, necklaces, and bracelets that sparkled like captured stars. The air was scented with something expensive and floral that made Lucia think of spring gardens she had only seen in pictures. As soon as she stepped inside, a hush fell over the room. The handful of customers browsing the displays paused in their conversations to stare at the unexpected intruder. A security guard near the back wall straightened, his hand moving instinctively toward his belt. A tall woman in a black dress approached, her heels clicking against the marble floor like small hammers. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her red-painted lips were pressed into a thin line. "Can I help you?" she asked, making it clear from her tone that the only assistance she was interested in providing was showing Lucia the way out. Lucia swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how dry her throat had become. I want to buy a present for my mother," she said, her voice sounding small in the vast, elegant space. The woman, her name tag identified her as Ms. Harrington, raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Indeed," she replied, her gaze sweeping over Lucia's worn clothes and scuffed boots. "And what sort of present did you have in mind?" "A silver swallow pendant," Lucia answered promptly. "I saw it in a magazine. It's her birthday tomorrow and she's been very sick, and I thought it might make her happy." "I see," Miss Harrington interrupted, her voice cutting through Lucia's explanation like a knife. "And how are you planning to pay for this pendant?" Lucia reached into her pocket and pulled out her coin pouch. "I have $67.35. she said proudly, loosening the drawstring to show the collection of coins and crumpled bills. "I've been saving for months." A couple browsing nearby exchanged amused glances. Ms. Harrington's mouth twitched, and then she let out a short, sharp laugh that echoed in the quiet store. $67, she repeated, making no effort to hide her disdain. "My dear child, there is nothing in this store, not even a gift box, that costs less than several $100s. The swallow pendant you mentioned retails for $895 plus tax." Lucia felt as though someone had knocked the wind from her lungs. $895. It was more money than she had ever seen in her life, more than their monthly rent. But I need to get something special," she stammered, desperation creeping into her voice. "It's her birthday and she's been so sad and—" "This is not a charity shop," Miss Harrington said coldly. "Now I'm going to have to ask you to leave before you disturb our actual customers any further." Lucia's cheeks burned with humiliation as she clutched her coin pouch. The security guard had begun moving in her direction, and the other customers were staring openly now, some with pity, others with impatience. "Perhaps there's something smaller, even just a tiny—" "Out," Miss Harrington said firmly, gesturing toward the door. "Before I call the authorities." Tears welled in Lucia's eyes, blurring the glittering displays around her. She turned to leave, her small shoulders slumped in defeat, when a deep voice cut through the uncomfortable silence. "Wait." Lucia turned at the sound of the voice, wiping her eyes quickly with the back of her hand. A tall man, in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, stood near one of the display cases, watching the scene with a thoughtful expression. He appeared to be in his early 40s, with salt and pepper hair and eyes that seemed to notice everything at once. "Mr. Rhodes," Miss Harrington said, her demeanor instantly transforming from contemptuous to deferential. "I was just explaining to this young visitor that we don't have anything in her price range." Mr. Rhodes, the name registered in Lucia's mind. This was one of the owners of the store, half of the Bellamy and Rhodes name that gleamed in gold letters outside. "Is that so?" he replied, his gaze never leaving Lucia. "And what is your price range, young lady?" Lucia swallowed, clutching her coin pouch tighter. $67.35, sir." Something flickered across his face, not mockery as she had expected, but something else she couldn't quite identify. "And you've been saving this money for how long?" he asked, his voice gentler now. 4 months, sir." 4 months, he repeated, nodding slowly. "That's quite a commitment for someone your age. And you're here to buy a gift for your mother. I understand." "Yes, sir, it's her birthday tomorrow, and she's been very sick, and I thought—" Lucia trailed off, not wanting to cry again in front of this important man. Mr. Rhodes was quiet for a moment, studying her with an intensity that made Lucia want to look away, though she managed to hold his gaze. "Miss Harrington," he finally said, turning to the saleswoman, "please show this young lady the swallow pendant collection." Miss Harrington's eyes widened slightly. "The swallow collection, sir, but—" "The swallow collection," he repeated firmly. "Every piece we have." The saleswoman hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Of course, Mr. Rhodes, right away." As she moved to retrieve a tray from one of the locked cases, Mr. Rhodes gestured to a small velvet-upholstered chair. "Why don't you have a seat, Miss, Lucia Martin, sir." "Miss Martin, please, sit down. I believe we can find something suitable for your mother's birthday." Stunned, Lucia perched on the edge of the chair, her feet barely touching the floor. She watched as Miss Harrington returned with a black velvet tray containing several delicate pendants, each featuring a silver swallow in various poses of flight. "These are our current pieces featuring the swallow motif," Ms. Harrington explained, her professional demeanor firmly back in place, though her eyes still held traces of annoyance. "Each is crafted in sterling silver with various accents." Lucia leaned forward, her breath catching at the beauty of the pieces. There were 7 pendants in total, each one more exquisite than the last. Some had tiny diamonds for eyes, others featured wings spread in full flight, or swallows perched as if ready to take off. "They're beautiful," she whispered, afraid to touch them. "Which one do you think your mother would like best?" Mr. Rhodes asked, watching her reaction closely. Without hesitation, Lucia pointed to a pendant in the center of the tray. It was simpler than some of the others. A single swallow in mid-flight, its wings outstretched as if soaring into the sky. No diamonds, no additional embellishments, just the pure, graceful form of the bird, captured in polished silver. "This one," she said confidently, "because my mum always says that swallows carry our dreams on their wings, and right now her biggest dream is to get well again and go back to teaching her kindergarten class." Mr. Rhodes nodded approvingly. "An excellent choice. That particular piece was designed by my daughter, Alexandra. She's studying jewelry design at university." He turned to Miss Harrington. "Please wrap it up for Miss Martin, along with our finest silver chain." Lucia's heart sank. Despite Mr. Rhodes's kindness, she still couldn't afford the pendant. "Sir, I don't think—" "How much did you say you had saved?" he interrupted gently. $67.35, sir." Mr. Rhodes smiled. "What a fortunate coincidence. We're having a special sale today, and that pendant has been marked down to precisely $67.35. Lucia's eyes widened. "Really?" "Really," he confirmed, though his eyes twinkled in a way that suggested otherwise. "Although," he added, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret, "we usually require payment in proper currency, not coins. However, I'm willing to make an exception in your case." Ms. Harrington's expression suggested that no such sale existed, but she said nothing as she carefully removed the pendant from the tray and carried it to the wrapping counter. Lucia opened her coin pouch and began counting out her savings onto the small table beside her chair. Pennies, nickels, dimes, quarters, and a few crumpled dollar bills, the sum total of her 4 months of work. Mr. Rhodes watched patiently, making no comment about the unusual form of payment. $67.35 exactly, Lucia announced when she had emptied the pouch. "Excellent," Mr. Rhodes replied, gesturing to a young man behind the counter who hurried over to collect the money. Meanwhile, Miss Harrington had returned with a small blue box tied with a silver ribbon. She handed it to Lucia with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you for shopping at Bellamy and Rhodes," she said mechanically. "We hope your mother enjoys her gift." Lucia accepted the box with reverent hands, scarcely able to believe what had just happened. "Thank you, Miss Harrington, and thank you, Mr. Rhodes. My mom is going to be so happy." "I believe she will," Mr. Rhodes agreed. "It's not every day a mother receives a gift purchased with so much love and dedication." As Lucia stood to leave, clutching the precious box to her chest, Mr. Rhodes reached into his pocket and produced a business card. "One more thing, Miss Martin. Would you be kind enough to give me your address? I'd like to send your mother a birthday card as well." Lucia hesitated, remembering her mother's warnings about giving their address to strangers. But Mr. Rhodes didn't feel like a stranger anymore, and he certainly didn't seem dangerous. "We live at 1142 Maple Street, apartment 3B, she said. "It's in the East Side neighborhood." Mr. Rhodes nodded, making a note on the back of his card. "Thank you, Lucia. Now, do you have a safe way to get home? It's getting colder outside." "I'm taking the bus, sir. I have enough money for the fare." This wasn't exactly true. She had spent all her money on the pendant, but she didn't want to cause any more trouble. She would walk if necessary, even, though it would take over an hour. Mr. Rhodes seemed to read her thoughts. "I think we can do better than that," he said. "David, could you please call Ms. Martin a taxi? Charge it to my personal account." The young man who had collected her coins nodded and moved to the phone at the counter. "That's not necessary, really," Lucia began, but Mr. Rhodes shook his head. "I insist. Consider it part of our customer service. We want to ensure that your mother's gift arrives home safely." 10 minutes later, Lucia found herself seated in the back of a warm taxi, the blue box secure in her pocket, heading back to her neighborhood, with a sense of wonder at how the day had unfolded. She had entered Bellamy and Rhodes feeling small and insignificant, only to leave with exactly what she had come for, and the kindness of a stranger who had seen past her worn clothes to the determination in her heart. As the taxi navigated the city streets, Lucia imagined her mother's face when she opened the box tomorrow morning. For a few precious moments, Eleanor would forget about the medical bills, the unanswered job applications, the uncertain future. She would see the silver swallow and remember that hope, like the bird itself, could soar even in the darkest of skies. What Lucia couldn't possibly know was that Mr. Rhodes was already back in his office, making a series of phone calls that would change her life forever. Sunday morning arrived with a fresh dusting of snow and a stillness that seemed to blanket the city in peaceful silence. Lucia woke early, her excitement about her mother's birthday making sleep impossible. She slipped out of bed and padded to the kitchen in her socks, determined to make Elena's birthday breakfast as special as possible with their limited resources. Their refrigerator contained only the basics: eggs, a half-gallon of milk nearing, its expiration date a small pat of butter, but Lucia was nothing if not resourceful. From the cupboard, she retrieved the last of the pancake mix and a small bottle of vanilla extract. Mrs. Peterson had given her a jar of homemade strawberry preserves last week as thanks for helping with her groceries, and that would serve as the perfect topping. While the first pancake sizzled in the pan, Lucia arranged a small vase with paper flowers she had created from colored pages of an old magazine. She had spent hours folding and shaping them to look as real as possible, and, in the soft morning light, they almost seemed to bloom on the scratched surface of their kitchen table. When the breakfast was ready, a stack of golden pancakes drizzled with preserves and a cup of tea with the last of the honey, Lucia placed the small blue box from Bellamy and Rhodes beside the plate. Her heart fluttered with anticipation as she carried the tray to her mother's bedroom. "Mum?" she called softly, pushing the door open with her foot. "Happy birthday." Eleanor was already awake, propped up against her pillows with a book in her lap. Despite the pallor of her skin and the thinness of her face, her smile was radiant as she saw her daughter. "Lucia, what's all this?" "Birthday breakfast," Lucia announced proudly, setting the tray carefully across her mother's lap. "And a present." Elena's eyes widened at the sight of the elegant blue box with its silver ribbon. "Oh, mi vida, you shouldn't have spent your money on me." "Open it," Lucia urged, perching on the edge of the bed, unable to contain her excitement. With careful fingers, Eleanor untied the ribbon and lifted the lid of the box. Her gasp was everything Lucia had hoped for. It's beautiful," Elena whispered, lifting the silver swallow pendant from its velvet nest. The morning light caught the polished surface, sending tiny reflections dancing across the bedroom wall. "But Lucia, this must have cost—" "It was on sale," Lucia interrupted quickly. "A special sale just yesterday. The owner of the store told me so himself." Eleanor looked up sharply, her maternal instincts clearly detecting something unusual in this explanation. "The owner? What store did you go to?" Lucia hesitated, then decided that the truth was necessary. "Bellamy and Rhodes. I saw the pendant in your magazine, and I knew how much you liked it, so I saved up and—" "Bellamy and Rhodes?" Elena repeated, her voice rising in disbelief. "Lucia, that's one of the most expensive jewelry stores in the city. How could you possibly—" A sudden knock at their apartment door interrupted her question. Lucia jumped up, relieved at the distraction. "I'll get it." She hurried through the small apartment, wondering who could be visiting so early on a Sunday morning. When she opened the door, she found herself facing a delivery man holding a large white box tied with a gold ribbon. "Delivery for Elena Martin," he announced, consulting a clipboard. "Birthday delivery from Bellamy and Rhodes." Stunned, Lucia accepted the box. "Thank you," she managed to say. The delivery man tipped his hat and turned to leave, then paused. "Almost forgot. There's a car waiting downstairs as well. The driver asked me to tell you that he'll be ready whenever Ms. Martin and her daughter are." "A car? Waiting for us?" Lucia repeated, confused. "Why?" The man shrugged. "I just deliver the packages, miss." But he said something about a birthday. Brunch reservation at the Grand Hotel at 11. After the delivery man left, Lucia carried the mysterious box to her mother's bedroom, her mind racing with questions. Eleanor looked up from admiring her pendant, her expression changing to one of confusion at the sight of the large box. Who was at the door? "A delivery man," Lucia explained, setting the box on the bed. "This is from Bellamy and Rhodes too, and he said there's a car waiting to take us to brunch at the Grand Hotel." Eleanor's confusion deepened. "Lucia, what exactly happened at that store yesterday?" As Lucia recounted her experience, Ms. Harrington's dismissal, Mr. Rhodes's intervention, the special sale that had allowed her to purchase the pendant, Eleanor's expression shifted from concern to amazement. "And he asked for our address to send a birthday card," Lucia concluded. "I guess this is it." "This is more than a birthday card," Elena murmured, touching the white box tentatively. "Should we open it?" Together, they untied the gold ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in layers of tissue paper, lay 2 garment bags. The first contained a simple but elegant navy blue dress in exactly Elena's size. The second held a deep burgundy velvet dress that would fit Lucia perfectly. Beneath the garment bags were 2 shoe boxes containing matching leather boots, warm cashmere, scarves and leather gloves. A cream-colored envelope rested at the bottom of the box. Elena opened it with trembling fingers and read aloud the handwritten note inside. "Dear Miss Martin, your daughter's determination to give you something special for your birthday touched me deeply. Her love for you is evident in every word she speaks about you. I would be honored if you and Lucia would join me for a birthday brunch at the Grand Hotel today at 11 o'clock. The car will wait for as long as you need to prepare. With sincere birthday wishes, Alexander Rhodes." Elena looked up from the note, her eyes glistening with tears. "I don't understand. Why would he do this for us? He doesn't even know us." Lucia shrugged, her fingers caressing the soft velvet of the burgundy dress. "He seemed nice, and he really listened when I told him about you." Elena looked at the clock on her bedside table. It was just past 8, giving them nearly 3 hours to prepare. Despite her illness, a spark of excitement lit her eyes. "Well," she said, with more energy than Lucia had seen in weeks, "I suppose we shouldn't keep Mr. Rhodes waiting. Help me up, mi vida. I need to take a proper shower if I'm going to the Grand Hotel on my birthday." As Elena slowly made her way to the bathroom, leaning on Lucia's shoulder for support, neither of them could have anticipated how this unexpected invitation would alter the course of their lives. Alexander Rhodes was not simply a wealthy man performing a random act of kindness. He was a man with a purpose, and that purpose was about to be revealed over birthday brunch in one of the city's most prestigious hotels. The Grand Hotel stood like a palace of glass and stone in the heart of the city, its revolving doors continuously ushering in the wealthy, the powerful, and the privileged. When the sleek black car delivered Elena and Lucia to the entrance, both felt the weight of curious gazes from the uniformed doorman and well-dressed guests entering the lobby. Elena had managed to style her hair and apply a touch of her rarely used makeup, bringing some color back to her pale cheeks. The navy dress fit her perfectly, skimming over her too thin frame with an elegance that momentarily disguised the ravages of her illness. Still, she leaned heavily on the ornate cane that had been thoughtfully included with their outfits, her strength already waning from the simple act of getting dressed. Lucia walked beside her mother, nervously adjusting the unfamiliar weight of the velvet dress and fighting the urge to touch her hair, which Elena had arranged in an intricate braid intertwined with a burgundy ribbon that matched her outfit. She had never worn such fine clothes before, and the sensation was both thrilling and unsettling. "Are you sure about this, Mum?" Lucia whispered as they approached the hotel's imposing entrance. "We can still go home if you're too tired." Elena squeezed her daughter's hand. "I wouldn't miss this for the world, mi vida. Besides, it would be rude to refuse such a kind invitation." The lobby of the Grand Hotel was a cathedral of luxury, with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and richly upholstered furniture arranged in intimate groupings. A massive floral arrangement dominated the center of the space, its exotic blooms filling the air with a subtle fragrance that mingled with the scents of expensive perfumes and polished wood. At the reception desk, Eleanor gave their names to a poised young woman in a tailored uniform. "Ah, yes, Miss Martin and Miss Martin," the receptionist said with a warm smile. "Mr. Rhodes is expecting you in the Azure Room. Philip will escort you." A young man in a crisp hotel uniform appeared at their side and led them across the lobby to a bank of elevators reserved for the hotel's exclusive private dining rooms. As they ascended to the 15th floor, Lucia's stomach fluttered with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. What did Mr. Rhodes want with them? Why had he gone to such trouble for strangers? The Azure Room lived up to its name, decorated, in varying shades of blue that created the illusion of being suspended in a clear sky. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the snow-covered city, the white rooftops glittering in the winter sunlight. Alexander Rhodes rose from a table by the window as they entered. He was dressed more casually than he had been at the store, in a light grey sweater and dark slacks, but his presence was no less commanding. Miss Martin, he greeted them, his smile genuine and warm. Thank you for accepting my invitation. I'm Alexander Rhodes, but please call me Alex. Mr. Rhodes, Alex, Elena corrected herself, extending her hand. I don't know how to thank you for your kindness to my daughter yesterday and for this lovely invitation. The pleasure is entirely mine, he assured her, guiding them to the table which was set for three with fine china and crystal. I must say, Lucia made quite an impression. It's not every day that someone enters Bellamy and Rhodes with such clear purpose and determination. As they settled into their seats, a waiter appeared to fill their water glasses and distribute linen napkins. Another server presented menus bound in soft leather, explaining that the chef had prepared a special birthday selection, but that they were welcome to order anything they desired. Lucia watched her mother carefully, noting how she straightened her posture and adopted the subtle mannerisms of someone familiar with such settings. Before her illness, Eleanor had been an elementary school teacher with a passion for literature and history. She had raised Lucia on a steady diet of books about far-off places and times, instilling in her daughter a rich imagination that transformed their modest circumstances into adventures. Lucia tells me you're a teacher, Alex said, as if reading Lucia's thoughts. Elena nodded. 3rd grade, although I've been on medical leave for the past 3 months. Mom is the best teacher in the whole school, Lucia interjected proudly. All the kids want to be in her class because she makes everything into a story. Even math. Alex smiled at Lucia's enthusiasm. That's a rare gift. I imagine your students miss you very much. I miss them too, Elena admitted, a shadow crossing her face. But my doctors are optimistic that I'll be able to return next semester, at least part-time. The conversation flowed easily as they made their selections from the menu: eggs Benedict for Elena, chocolate chip pancakes for Lucia, and a smoked salmon omelette for Alex. Throughout the meal, Lucia noticed how attentively Alex listened to her mother, how he seemed genuinely interested in Eleanor's stories about her students and her perspectives on education. For her part, Eleanor gradually relaxed, the stiffness leaving her shoulders as she realized that Alex's invitation had come with no hidden agenda. He simply seemed to enjoy their company. It was only when they were lingering over dessert, a decadent chocolate birthday cake that had been brought out with a single candle for Elena to wish upon, that Alex finally addressed the question that had been hovering unspoken in the air. I imagine you're both wondering why I invited you here today, he said, setting down his coffee cup. Eleanor smiled diplomatically. The thought had crossed my mind. It's not every day that a stranger sends couture outfits and a chauffeured car for a birthday brunch. Alex laughed, a rich, warm sound that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Fair enough. The truth is, Lucia's visit to the store yesterday coincided with something I've been considering for some time. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. How much do you know about Bellamy and Rhodes, Miss Martin? Very little, Elena admitted. Only that it's one of the most prestigious jewelry stores in the city, and clearly well beyond my usual shopping venues. The business was founded by my grandfather and his partner, Edward Bellamy, in 1948, Alex explained. It's remained family-owned ever since, although the Bellamy family sold their interest to us about 20 years ago. I took over as CEO after my father retired 5 years ago. He took a sip of his coffee before continuing. What you may not know is that my grandfather started the business with nothing but talent and determination. He was a jeweler's apprentice who had immigrated to this country with empty pockets but extraordinary skill. Edward Bellamy was a wealthy patron who recognized his talent and invested in his future. Lucia listened intently, fascinated by this glimpse into Mr. Rhodes's world. My grandfather never forgot what it was like to have nothing but a dream, Alex continued. When the business became successful, he established a foundation to support education and entrepreneurship for underprivileged youth. After his death last year, I've been looking for ways to expand that mission. He turned to Lucia, his expression serious. Your determination to give your mother something special, despite all obstacles, reminded me very much of my grandfather's stories about his early days. It made me realize that I've been thinking too conventionally about how to honor his legacy. Eleanor set down her fork, her dessert forgotten. I'm not sure I understand. I'm proposing to establish a new initiative through the Rhodes Foundation, Alex explained. A program specifically designed to support families facing medical hardships, families like yours. Elena's back stiffened slightly. Mr. Rhodes, while I appreciate your kindness, we're not looking for charity, she said, her voice gentle but firm. What Lucia did was simply an act of love, not an attempt to— Not charity, Alex interrupted, shaking his head. An opportunity. I'd like to offer you a position with the Rhodes Foundation, Elena, a chance to use your teaching experience to develop educational programs for families going through medical hardships like yours. Children who miss school because of their own illnesses, or while caring for family members often fall behind. We need someone who understands both education and the realities these families face. Lucia's eyes widened as she watched her mother's expression shift from polite resistance to cautious interest. I don't understand, Elena said slowly. You want to hire me? But you don't even know my qualifications. Alex smiled. Actually, I do. After meeting Lucia yesterday, I made a few inquiries. Your principal at Westwood Elementary speaks very highly of your innovative teaching methods. You were nominated for the city's Excellence in Education Award 2 years running, and the parent reviews I found online were glowing. He leaned forward. The Rhodes Foundation needs someone exactly like you, passionate, creative, and with first-hand understanding of our mission. But my health. Eleanor gestured vaguely to the cane leaning against her chair. The position includes comprehensive health insurance and flexible working conditions, Alex replied smoothly. You can work remotely when necessary, and will ensure you have access to the medical care you need. He paused. I won't pretend. This isn't partly inspired by meeting Lucia, but it's not charity, Elena. It's a business decision. You have skills we need, and we can offer you the stability you deserve. The weeks following Elena's birthday brought changes that neither she nor Lucia could have imagined. After several discussions with Alex and the Rhodes Foundation Board, and careful review of the surprisingly generous employment contract, Elena had accepted the position as Educational Programs Director. The job came not only with comprehensive health insurance, but also with a housing allowance that allowed them to move from their drafty apartment to a comfortable 2-bedroom condominium in a safe neighborhood much closer to Lucia's school. Elena's health had improved dramatically, with access to specialists and treatments that had previously been unaffordable. Though she still tired easily and used a cane on bad days, the dark circles beneath her eyes had faded and her smile had returned in full force. For Lucia, the transformation in their lives seemed nothing short of magical. Her new bedroom had a window seat overlooking a small park. The kitchen always had food in the refrigerator. Best of all, she no longer had to worry constantly about her mother, watching for signs of pain or listening for coughing in the night. On a bright February morning, Lucia sat at the kitchen table, sketching ideas for a school project while Elena prepared breakfast. Sunshine streamed through windows no longer covered with plastic sheeting to keep out drafts, illuminating a space that actually felt like home. Do you think Miss Harrington ever found out who you really are? Lucia asked suddenly, looking up from her drawing. The snobbish saleswoman from Bellamy and Rhodes had become something of a private joke between them. Eleanor laughed as she flipped a blueberry pancake. I imagine she got quite a shock when she realized her mistake. She transferred the pancake to a plate and brought it to the table. But you know, in a way, we should be grateful to her. Grateful? Why? Lucia asked, wrinkling her nose at the thought. If she hadn't been so dismissive, Mr. Rhodes might never have noticed us, Elena pointed out. Sometimes the people who try to block our path end up diverting us to a better one. As if summoned by their conversation, the doorbell rang. Lucia jumped up to answer it, expecting to find their neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who often brought over homemade dumplings on Saturday mornings. Instead, She opened the door to find Alex Rhodes standing in the hallway, holding a large portfolio case and looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Good morning, Lucia," he greeted her with a smile. "I hope I'm not interrupting your breakfast." "Alex? No, we're just having pancakes. Would you like some?" Lucia stepped back to let him enter, already comfortable with his occasional visits to discuss foundation business with her mother. Elena appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "This is a surprise," she said, though her smile suggested it was a pleasant one. "What brings you here on a Saturday morning?" Alex set his portfolio on the coffee table. "I wanted to show you both something before the public announcement next week." He glanced at Lucia. "Actually, it's something I'm hoping Lucia might help me with." Intrigued, Lucia plopped onto the sofa. "Me? What can I do?" Alex unzipped the portfolio and carefully removed several large photographs and design mock-ups. He arranged them on the coffee table, revealing architectural renderings of a modern building surrounded by gardens. "This is the new Rhodes Foundation Educational Center," he explained, his voice taking on the excited tone it always did when he discussed foundation projects. "Construction begins next month on the east side of the city." Eleanor examined the renderings with interest. "It's beautiful. Is this where my office will be once it's completed?" "Yours and many others," Alex confirmed, "but the centerpiece of the building will be this." He pointed to a large circular space in the center of the floor plan. The butterfly garden, an indoor atrium filled with tropical plants and free-flying butterflies. It's designed to be a peaceful retreat for children and families in our programs, a place of beauty and transformation. "Butterflies," Lucia whispered, entranced by the colorful concept art showing the proposed garden. "Real ones?" "Very real," Alex assured her. "Over 30 species from around the world, living in a carefully maintained ecosystem." He hesitated, then turned to face Lucia directly. "What I wanted to ask you, Lucia, is if you would do us the honor of designing the entry mural for the garden." Lucia blinked in surprise. "Me? But I'm not an artist." Alex smiled, reaching into his portfolio once more and removing a familiar sheet of paper. Lucia's drawing of swallows in flight that she'd sketched during one of their early foundation meetings. "I think you sell yourself short. Your mother has shown me some of your work, and you have a unique way of capturing hope and movement. That's exactly what we want visitors to feel when they enter the garden." Eleanor placed a hand on Lucia's shoulder. "You don't have to decide right away, mi vida. It's a big responsibility." But Lucia was already imagining it, a wall filled with butterflies and swallows soaring together, carrying dreams on their wings. "I want to do it," she declared, her mind racing with ideas. "But I'll need help. I've never done anything so big before." "That's already arranged," Alex assured her. "The foundation has partnered with the city's art institute. You'll work with a professional muralist who will guide you, but the concept and design will be yours." He hesitated. "There's one more thing. The board has voted to name the entire educational center after someone who embodies the spirit of determination and hope that we want the center to represent." He looked meaningfully at Lucia, whose eyes widened with understanding. "The Elena Martin Educational Center," Alex announced softly. "If you'll accept the honor." Elena's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes suddenly bright with tears. "Alex, I can't possibly. I haven't done anything to deserve." "You raised a daughter who walked into a luxury store with $67 and the absolute certainty that nothing would stop her from showing her mother how much she was loved," Alex interrupted gently. "That kind of determination and hope is exactly what the foundation aims to foster in all the children we work with." As Elena struggled to find words, Lucia slipped her hand into her mother's. This moment, her mother speechless with joy rather than silenced by pain, their future stretching bright and promising before them, was worth more than all the silver pendants in the world. What neither Lucia nor Elena realized was that Alex's proposal concealed another layer of meaning, one that he himself was only beginning to acknowledge. The persistent widower and dedicated philanthropist had found himself drawn not just to their story, but to their presence in his life, a development that would soon add yet another unexpected dimension to their unfolding connection. Spring arrived with a burst of color and activity that seemed to mirror the transformation in Lucia and Elena's lives. The ground had been broken for the Elena Martin Educational Center, construction progressing rapidly under Alex's watchful eye. Elena had fully embraced her role at the Rhodes Foundation, developing innovative programs that were already being implemented in pilot form at 3 local hospitals. For Lucia, life had settled into a new and happier routine. Her grades had improved now that she no longer had to worry about her mother or take on adult responsibilities. She had made friends in their new building and neighborhood. And 3 afternoons a week, she met with Isabella Vega, the muralist from the Art Institute who was helping her develop her design for the butterfly garden. On a particularly beautiful Saturday in April, Lucia sat cross-legged on the floor of their living room, surrounded by sketches, color swatches, and reference books about butterflies. Elena had gone to a doctor's appointment, a routine checkup, nothing concerning, leaving Lucia to work on her design until she returned. The doorbell rang, interrupting Lucia's concentration as she deliberated between 2 shades of blue for a morpho butterfly's wings. She opened the door to find Alex standing there, a concerned expression on his face. "Alex, Mom's not home, right? No, but she should be back soon. Do you want to come in and wait?" Lucia stepped aside to let him enter. Alex hesitated, then nodded, following her into the apartment. "Actually, Lucia, I wanted to talk to you first. There's something important I need to ask you." "Is it about the mural?" Lucia asked, gesturing to her work spread across the floor. "I've almost finalized the design. Isabella says we can start painting scale models next week." "No, it's not. About the mural," Alex said, sitting carefully on the edge of the sofa to avoid disturbing her materials. "It's about your mother." Lucia felt a flutter of alarm. "Is something wrong? Did something happen at her appointment?" "No, nothing like that," Alex quickly reassured her. "It's just, well, I've come to care very deeply for Elena over these past months, and for you too, Lucia." Lucia studied him curiously. Alex had become a regular presence in their lives, dropping by with books he thought they might enjoy, joining them for dinner occasionally, even helping Lucia with a science project when Elena had been too tired. But there had always been something reserved about him, a careful distance he maintained. "We care about you too," she said simply. Alex smiled, though there was a nervous quality to it that Lucia had never seen before. "I'm glad to hear that, because what I want to ask is—" He paused, taking a deep breath. "I'd like your permission to ask your mother to dinner. Not a business dinner, but a date." Lucia's eyes widened. This was unexpected, and yet, thinking back over the past months, perhaps not entirely surprising. She had noticed how Alex's gaze often followed her mother around a room, how he seemed to find reasons to extend their conversations, how his usually confident demeanor softened in Elena's presence. "You want to date my mom?" she asked, wanting to be absolutely clear. Alex nodded, his expression serious. "I do, but your feelings on this matter enormously to me, Lucia. If you're uncomfortable with the idea, or if you think it would complicate things in a way that would make you unhappy, I won't pursue it." Lucia considered this. In all the books she had read, the wealthy benefactor falling in love with the struggling single mother was a common trope, but real life was messier than stories. What if they started dating and then broke up? Would her mother lose her job? Would they have to move again? If you and Mom dated, and then you didn't want to date anymore, would she still have her job? Lucia asked, giving voice to her most immediate concern. Alex's expression softened with understanding. "Absolutely. Eleanor's position at the foundation is based on her qualifications and performance, not on any personal relationship with me. The board hired her, not me personally, and they've been extremely impressed with her work. And we wouldn't have to move again. No. The condominium is part of Elena's compensation package. It's yours regardless of anything else." Lucia nodded, processing this information. "Do you think Mom might say yes?" For the first time, a flash of uncertainty crossed Alex's face. "I honestly don't know. Your mother is an extraordinary woman. Brilliant, compassionate, determined. She's also fiercely independent, as you know better than anyone. She might feel that accepting my invitation would somehow compromise that independence." This was true. Eleanor had made it clear from the beginning that while she was grateful for the opportunity Alex had provided, she intended to earn her position through hard work and merit, not gratitude or obligation. "But you really like her, not just because of her story or because you feel sorry for us," Lucia pressed, suddenly feeling protective of her mother's feelings. "I admire her resilience and her spirit," Alex replied thoughtfully. "I enjoy her intelligence and her perspective on the world. I find myself thinking about her when we're not together, wondering what she might say about a book I'm reading or a problem I'm facing." He smiled softly. "And yes, I find her beautiful, though I suspect she doesn't see herself that way." Lucia considered this answer, finding in it the sincerity she had been looking for. "Mom deserves to be really happy," she said finally. "She's been alone for a long time, taking care of me and everyone else, but never really having someone to take care of her. I would very much like the opportunity to try," Alex said quietly. Before Lucia could respond, they heard a key in the lock. The door opened to reveal Elena, her cheeks flushed from the spring air, a small smile playing on her lips as she spotted Alex sitting on the sofa. "This is a nice surprise," she said, hanging her light jacket on the hook by the door. "Are you here on foundation business?" Alex stood, exchanging a quick glance with Lucia, who gave him an almost imperceptible nod. "Not exactly," he admitted. "I was hoping to ask you to dinner. Tomorrow night, perhaps." Elena looked momentarily startled, her gaze flicking between Alex and Lucia. "Dinner? The three of us?" "Actually," Alex clarified, his usual confidence now tempered with a touch of vulnerability, "I was hoping it might be just the two of us. Although," he added quickly, glancing at Lucia, "I've already been thoroughly interviewed by your daughter regarding my intentions." Elena's eyebrows rose. "Have you indeed?" She turned to Lucia with a questioning look. Lucia gathered her sketches into a neat pile, suddenly feeling that they might need some privacy. "He checks out," she announced with a solemnity that made both adults laugh. "And I already told Mrs. Chen I might want to have dinner with her tomorrow night. She's been teaching me to make dumplings." With that, Lucia grabbed her sketchbook and headed toward her bedroom, pausing only briefly at the door to glance back. Her mother stood in the center of the living room, looking simultaneously flustered and intrigued. Alex waited patiently, his expression open and hopeful. Just before closing her door, Lucia saw her mother nod and smile, a smile that reached her eyes in a way Lucia hadn't seen in years. As the door clicked shut, Lucia leaned against it, a surprising mix of emotions washing over her. Part of her felt a twinge of worry. Would her special bond with her mother change if Elena began dating Alex? Would they still have their Saturday morning pancake tradition and their bedtime story routine? But a larger part felt something unexpected: hope. Not just for continued financial security or better opportunities, but for her mother's happiness, for the chance for Elena to be not just a caregiver, but someone who was cared for in return. Lucia had set out months ago with $67.35, determined to buy her mother a symbol of hope. Now, against all odds, that small silver swallow had carried them to possibilities she could never have imagined. What she couldn't know then was that Alex's unexpected dinner invitation would set in motion events that would test the foundation of trust they had built, and force her to confront feelings she had kept buried since the day her father had walked out of their lives 4 years earlier. The Elena Martin Educational Center took shape against the city skyline throughout the spring and summer, its modern glass and steel structure rising from what had once been an abandoned lot. Lucia visited the construction site regularly with Alex and her mother, watching with growing excitement as the butterfly garden atrium was framed and its massive skylight installed. Meanwhile, her mural design had progressed from sketches to a quarter-scale model that now stood proudly in the road's foundation office. The final version would span 20 feet across the entrance to the garden, depicting a girl releasing butterflies from cupped hands, their forms gradually transforming into birds of hope that soared upward. Isabella, her mentor, had helped her refine the composition and taught her techniques for working with the specialized acrylic paints that would withstand the garden's tropical humidity. Elena and Alex's relationship had developed with careful, measured steps. Their first date had led to a second and then a third. By midsummer, it was not unusual for Alex to join them for weekend outings or quiet evenings at home. He never stayed overnight, a boundary that Elena maintained and Alex respected. But his presence had become a comfortable constant in their lives. On a warm August evening, the three of them sat on the balcony of Elena and Lucia's apartment, watching fireflies rise from the park below. Elena had prepared a simple dinner of grilled vegetables and lemon chicken, and Alex had brought a carton of Lucia's favorite ice cream for dessert. "The construction foreman called today," Alex remarked, setting aside his empty plate. "They've completed the environmental controls for the butterfly garden. The first plants will be installed next week." "And the mural?" Lucia asked eagerly. She had been preparing to begin painting the real thing, a prospect both exciting and nerve-wracking. "The wall is primed and ready whenever you are," Alex assured her. "Isabella thinks you should start next Monday, if that works with your schedule." Lucia nodded, trying to hide her nervousness. "Mom, can we go shopping this weekend for some new clothes? I don't want to ruin my school clothes with paint." "Of course," Elena agreed. "We need to get you some new things for the school year anyway. 8th grade deserves a fresh start." The mention of the upcoming school year brought a small shadow to Lucia's expression. While she had made friends in their new neighborhood, she still sometimes felt like an outsider, the girl who had suddenly moved from one of the poorest parts of the city to one of the most comfortable, whose mother now had an important job and whose name would soon be on a building. It created a distance she didn't know how to bridge. As if sensing her thoughts, Alex leaned forward. "Actually, I wanted to talk to both of you about something related to the opening ceremony for the center. The board has been discussing how to handle the publicity, and we've had some interest from local media." Eleanor set down her glass of iced tea. "What kind of interest?" "A feature story on the foundation's work, with a focus on the new center. The City Chronicle wants to do a full-page spread in their Sunday magazine." Alex hesitated. "They're particularly interested in the story behind the naming of the center and the butterfly mural, which means they want to interview both of you." Lucia felt a twist of anxiety in her stomach. The thought of being in a newspaper, of having strangers read about their past struggles, made her deeply uncomfortable. She glanced at her mother, whose expression had become carefully neutral, a sign that she too was processing concerns. "I've told them that any interview would need to be on your terms," Alex continued, clearly having anticipated their hesitation. "You would have approval over the final article before publication, and of course you can decline entirely. The foundation doesn't need the publicity. This is about what you're comfortable sharing." Elena reached over to take Lucia's hand. "What do you think, mi vida? This is as much your story as it is mine." Lucia bit her lip, considering. Part of her wanted to say no immediately. She didn't want her classmates reading about how she had once collected bottles for pennies, or how they had lived without adequate heat in winter. She didn't want to be seen as a charity case, or have people whispering about them. But another part of her thought about other children who might be in similar situations, children who might benefit from knowing about the Foundation's programs, or who might find hope in their journey. "Could we talk about the Foundation and the center without telling our whole personal story?" she asked finally. "I mean, do they need to know everything about before?" Alex nodded. "Absolutely. You decide what you're willing to share. The focus can be entirely on the present and future, your mural, your mother's educational programs, the vision for the center." Elena squeezed Lucia's hand. "We don't have to decide tonight. We can think about it and discuss it more tomorrow." The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that, but the question lingered in Lucia's mind as the evening progressed. After Alex left with a promise to call the next day, Elena found Lucia sitting on her window seat, gazing out at the now darkened park. "Penny for your thoughts?" Elena asked, settling beside her. Lucia drew her knees up to her chest. "Do you think people will look at us differently if they know about before?" Elena considered this carefully. "Some might. People often make judgments based on circumstances rather than character. But the people who matter, the ones worth having in our lives, will see us for who we are, not what we've experienced or what we have. Like Alex did, Lucia murmured. Like Alex did, Elena agreed with a soft smile. He saw your determination and heart that day in the store, not just a child with a handful of coins. Lucia traced a pattern on the window glass with her fingertip. Mom, are you and Alec serious? The question had been forming in her mind for weeks now. She had watched their relationship develop with a mixture of happiness for her mother and a vague, undefined uneasiness that she couldn't quite name. Elena's expression became thoughtful. We're taking things slowly, but yes, I care for him very much. Does that worry you? No. Maybe. I don't know. Lucia struggled to articulate feelings she was still sorting through herself. I like Alex. He's kind and he makes you laugh. But what if what, mi vida? Elena prompted gently when Lucia trailed off. What if he leaves? Like Dad did. The words tumbled out before Lucia could stop them. She rarely spoke of her father, who had walked out when she was 4, leaving no forwarding address and making no attempt to contact them in the years since. Understanding dawned in Elena's eyes. She drew Lucia into a tight hug. Oh, my love, I wish I could promise you that will never happen. But the truth is, I can't predict the future any more than you can. She pulled back to look Lucia in the eyes. What I can tell you is that Alex is a man of integrity. If the time comes when our relationship needs to change, he would handle it with honesty and respect. He would never simply disappear from your life. You can't know that for sure, Lucia protested. I can, actually, Eleanor said with quiet confidence, because I wouldn't be involved with him if I had any doubt about his character. I've learned a few things since your father left, and one of them is to look for actions, not just words. Alex has shown us who he is through what he does, not just what he says. Lucia considered this, finding some reassurance in her mother's certainty. Still, a small knot of anxiety remained. But what if something happens to you? What if you get sick again, and he decides it's too hard, and then we lose everything? The apartment, your job, everything? Eleanor's expression softened with understanding. Is that what you're really worried about? That all this security depends on my relationship with Alex? Lucia nodded, ashamed to admit it, but unable to deny the fear that had been lurking beneath her happiness these past months. Listen to me, Eleanor said firmly. My job is secure because I'm good at it, not because I'm dating the CEO. The apartment is part of my compensation package, documented in a contract that doesn't change no matter what happens between Alex and me. And most importantly, she cupped Lucia's face in her hands. We survived before, you and I, with much less than we have now. If we ever had to, we could do it again. The confidence in her mother's voice eased some of Lucia's tension. She leaned into Elena's embrace, breathing in the familiar scent of her mother's perfume. I'm sorry for worrying about stuff that might never happen. Never apologize for your feelings, Elena murmured, stroking Lucia's hair. They're valid even when they're uncomfortable. All I ask is that you talk to me about them instead of carrying them alone. As the night deepened around them, Lucia felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The future remained uncertain. No one could promise otherwise. But perhaps it didn't need to be perfect to be good. Perhaps it was enough to know that whatever happened, she and her mother would face it together, just as they always had. What neither of them could anticipate was that their conversation would soon prove prophetic in ways they couldn't imagine, as a figure from their past prepared to re-enter their lives just as the Elena Martin Educational Center prepared for its grand opening, and that the true test of the foundation they had built would come not from Alex's potential departure, but from an unexpected arrival. The first week of September brought with it cooler temperatures, the return to school, and the beginning of Lucia's work on the Butterfly Garden mural. Each day after school, she changed into her paint-spattered clothes and spent 3 hours at the construction site, carefully bringing her design to life under Isabella's watchful guidance. The experience was transformative. Working on such a large scale required not just artistic skill, but physical endurance and problem-solving. Lucia had to learn to use scaffolding to reach the upper portions of the wall, to mix colors in quantities she had never worked with before, and to maintain perspective and proportion across 20 feet of space. By the end of the second week, The basic outlines of the design had been filled in, and the mural was beginning to take shape. The central figure, a girl releasing butterflies that transformed into birds, emerged from the wall with striking clarity. Lucia had deliberately made the girl's features somewhat indistinct, focusing instead on the expression of joy and release as the creatures took flight from her hands. "You're making remarkable progress," Alex commented one Friday afternoon as he stopped by to check on her work. He stood back, studying the mural with genuine appreciation. The board members who visited yesterday were extremely impressed. Lucia set down her brush, wiping her paint-stained hands on her smock. "Really? They're not just saying that because it's me?" Alex chuckled. "Trust me, our board doesn't offer empty praise. They're a demanding bunch. They were particularly moved by the symbolism. The transformation from butterflies to birds represents exactly what we hope to achieve with this center." Isabella, who had been organizing supplies nearby, nodded in agreement. "Your technique has improved tremendously, Lucia. You have an intuitive understanding of how color and movement work together to create emotional impact." Lucia felt a flush of pride at their praise. For so long, drawing had been a private escape, something she did in the margins of notebooks or on scraps of paper. Having her art displayed so prominently and appreciated by others still felt surreal. "The construction foreman tells me we're on schedule for the opening ceremony next month," Alex continued. "Have you and your mother given any more thought to the interview with the Chronicle?" Lucia and Elena had discussed the article extensively and had ultimately decided to participate with certain boundaries in place. They would focus on the present and the Foundation's mission rather than dwelling on their past struggles. "Mum said we'll do it," Lucia confirmed. "She already spoke with the reporter on the phone to set some ground rules." "Excellent. I think your perspective will add something valuable to the story." Alex checked his watch. "Speaking of your mother, she and I have a dinner reservation at 7. She asked me to see if you still wanted to have dinner with Isabella's family tonight." Isabella smiled warmly. "My mother is making her famous enchiladas, and my younger brothers are eager to meet the artist I've been working with. You're very welcome to join us, Lucia." Over the past weeks, Lucia had developed a genuine bond with the young muralist. Isabella, at 24, was like the older sister Lucia had never had, talented, kind, and refreshingly straightforward. The invitation to her family dinner had come spontaneously the day before, when Lucia had expressed interest in learning more about Mexican cuisine. "I'd love to come," Lucia confirmed, "as long as you let me help with something. I want to learn, not just eat." "Deal," Isabella laughed. "You can help my abuela make the salsa, but I warn you, she's very particular about how the tomatoes are chopped." After cleaning her brushes and covering her paints for the weekend, Lucia gathered her things and prepared to leave with Isabella. Alex promised to have her mother text when they finished dinner to arrange transportation home. Isabella's family lived in a vibrant neighborhood on the west side of the city, an area Lucia had never visited before. The apartment was modest but warm, filled with color, music, and the mouth-watering aroma of simmering spices. Isabella's parents, grandmother, and 2 teenage brothers welcomed Lucia with enthusiastic hospitality that immediately put her at ease. As promised, Lucia helped Isabella's grandmother prepare salsa, chopping tomatoes under her watchful eye while learning Spanish cooking terms between fits of laughter at her pronunciation. The meal itself was unlike anything Lucia had experienced, not just the delicious food, but the lively conversation, the easy affection between family members, and the genuine interest they showed in her life and her artwork. "So, your name will be on a big building soon, eh?" Isabella's father Miguel asked during a lull in the conversation. "You must be very proud of your mother." "I am," Lucia agreed, smiling at the thought of Elena's dedication to her work at the Foundation. She's developed programs for kids who have to miss school because of illness. They're already being used in 3 hospitals. "And this man, this Mr. Rhodes," Isabella's grandmother interjected with the directness of the elderly. "He is a good man?" "He treats your mother well?" Isabella looked mortified. "Abuela, that's personal." But Lucia didn't mind the question. "He is a good man," she confirmed. thinking of Alex's kindness and integrity. He makes Mom laugh, and he respects her work, and he asked my permission before he asked her on their first date. This detail clearly impressed Isabella's grandmother, who nodded approvingly. A man who recognizes a daughter's place in her mother's heart is a man who understands family. This is good. After dinner, while the adults lingered over coffee, Isabella took Lucia and her brothers to the small rooftop terrace. The evening was cool but pleasant, the city lights spreading out around them like earthbound stars. "Your family is amazing," Lucia said, leaning against the railing. "Everyone's so connected. You can tell how much you all care about each other." Isabella smiled, understanding the unspoken comparison. "We're not perfect. We argue and drive each other crazy sometimes. But yes, family is everything to us. I've always wondered what it would be like to have siblings," Lucia admitted, watching Isabella's brothers as they playfully shoved each other near the small rooftop garden. "It's a blessing and a curse," Isabella laughed. "They steal your clothes, embarrass you in front of your friends, and eat all the good snacks before you get home. But they're also the first ones to defend you when someone else tries to hurt you, and they know exactly how to make you laugh when you're sad." Lucia was quiet for a moment, contemplating this. "Do you think your family would be different if your dad wasn't around?" Isabella considered the question carefully. "Different, yes, but my mother is the strongest person I know. If circumstances had been different, she would have found a way for us to still be a family, just in another form." She glanced at Lucia. "Like your mother did for you." Before Lucia could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message from Eleanor, letting her know that she and Alex were finished with dinner and could pick her up in 20 minutes. The evening was drawing to a close. As Lucia gathered her things and thanked Isabella's family for their hospitality, she felt a curious mixture of contentment and longing. The warmth of their home reminded her of what she and her mother had built together, a bond of love and resilience that had sustained them through the hardest times. But it also highlighted what they had missed, the broader connections of extended family, the chaotic joy of siblings, the sense of belonging to something larger than themselves. On the ride home, sitting in the back seat of Alex's car, while he and her mother chatted in the front, Lucia found herself wondering if their small family of two might someday expand, not to replace what they had, but to build upon its strong foundation. The thought no longer filled her with anxiety as it once had. Instead, she felt a cautious openness to the possibilities the future might hold. What she couldn't know was that the universe had a way of testing such openness in unexpected ways, and that the true challenge to her evolving perspective would arrive not in the form of a potential stepfather, but in the return of the father, who had abandoned them years before. The grand opening of the Elena Martin Educational Center was scheduled for October 15th, just 6 weeks away. As the date approached, the pace of preparations intensified. The building itself was nearly complete, with only finishing touches and furnishings remaining. The butterfly garden had been planted with lush tropical vegetation, creating a humid, vibrant ecosystem ready to welcome its winged inhabitants, which would arrive just days before the opening. Lucia worked diligently on her mural, which was now about 70% complete. The central figures were fully realized, and she had begun adding the intricate background details that would bring the entire composition to life. Each day after school, she worked alongside Isabella, their easy camaraderie making the hours fly by. Meanwhile, Elena had become the public face of the Foundation's educational initiatives, giving presentations to hospital administrators and school officials about the programs she had developed. Her health continued to improve, and though she still experienced occasional fatigue, her energy had largely returned. On a crisp Saturday morning in late September, Lucia sat at the kitchen table reviewing her weekend homework while Elena prepared a shopping list for the week ahead. They had fallen into comfortable weekend routines, grocery shopping followed by lunch at their favorite cafe, perhaps a movie or a visit to a museum, and often dinner with Alex. "Do you think we should invite Alex to join us for lunch today?" Lucia asked, looking up from her algebra problems. "He mentioned wanting to try that new Thai place near the market." Eleanor smiled, a soft expression crossing her face at the mention of Alex's name. That's thoughtful of you, but he's tied up with foundation business all day. Board meeting preparations. The doorbell rang, interrupting their conversation. Elena glanced at the clock, puzzled. Are you expecting someone? It's barely 9. Lucia shook her head, equally confused. They rarely received visitors, especially this early on a weekend. Elena made her way to the door and opened it, her greeting dying on her lips as she saw who stood in the hallway. Lucia, curious about her mother's sudden silence, moved to join her and froze in disbelief. The man at the door was older than Lucia remembered, with more grey in his dark hair and lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. But the smile was the same, that crooked, charming smile that had once been as familiar to her as her own reflection. "Hello, Elena," he said quietly. "It's been a long time. David." Elena's voice was barely above a whisper, her hand gripping the doorframe as if for support. "What are you doing here?" David Martin shifted uncomfortably, his gaze moving past Elena to where Lucia stood, wide-eyed and speechless. "I came to see you both, to talk if you'll let me." "Dad?" Lucia finally managed, the word feeling strange and unfamiliar on her tongue after so many years. He nodded, his eyes brightening. "Look at you, Lucia, all grown up. You were just a little thing when I—" He stopped abruptly, perhaps realizing there was no good way to finish that sentence. Elena had recovered enough from her shock to straighten her shoulders and find her voice. "How did you find us? We moved years ago." "I went to the old apartment first," David admitted. "The new tenants didn't know where you'd gone, but I ran into Mrs. Peterson on the street. She mentioned something about a foundation job and a new place." He hesitated. "Then I saw the article in the paper last Sunday about the Elena Martin Educational Center. I couldn't believe it." Lucia remembered the interview they had done with the Chronicle reporter. The article had been published the previous weekend, a tasteful piece focusing on the Foundation's mission and Elena's innovative programs, with a sidebar about Lucia's mural. It had included their names and a photograph of them standing in front of the nearly completed center, but had respected their privacy regarding their past struggles. "May I come in?" David asked, when neither Elena nor Lucia responded. "Just to talk. I understand if you don't want to, but I've come a long way." Elena glanced at Lucia, silently asking what she wanted. The question caught Lucia off guard. This was her father, the man who had walked out on them without a backward glance when she was 4 years old. She had no memory of him ever asking what she wanted before. "I guess," she said finally, her voice small and uncertain. "Just to talk." Eleanor stepped aside, her movement stiff as she allowed David to enter the apartment. He looked around with obvious surprise at the comfortable, well-appointed space, so different from the cramped, shabby apartment they had shared years ago. "Nice place," he commented, settling awkwardly on the edge of the sofa when Elena gestured for him to sit. "You've done well for yourselves." "We have," Elena agreed, her voice cool and controlled as she took a seat in the armchair opposite him. Lucia perched on the arm of her mother's chair, instinctively positioning herself as Elena's ally. "No thanks to you." David winced at the justified barb, but didn't dispute it. "I deserve that. I deserve a lot worse, actually." He drew a deep breath. "I'm not here to make excuses. What I did was unforgivable. I abandoned my responsibilities to both of you." "Why are you here then?" Eleanor asked directly. "It's been almost 5 years, David." He looked down at his hands, which Lucia noticed were rougher and more calloused than she remembered. "I'm here because I've been sober for 2 years now, and part of my recovery is making amends to the people I've hurt. You and Lucia are at the top of that list." Elena's expression didn't soften. "Congratulations on your sobriety. That takes courage and commitment. But it doesn't erase what happened." "I know it doesn't," David acknowledged, "and I'm not asking for forgiveness or a second chance or anything like that. I just wanted you both to know that I recognize the pain I caused, and I'm truly sorry." He turned to Lucia. "Especially to you, Lucia. You deserved a father who was there for you, and I failed you completely." Lucia didn't know how to respond. For years, she had imagined this moment, her father returning, apologizing, explaining why he had left. In her childhood fantasies, she had run into his arms, forgiveness flowing easily. But the reality was more complicated. The man sitting across from them was both familiar and a stranger, his apology both appreciated and insufficient. "What have you been doing all this time?" she asked finally, curiosity winning out over resentment. David seemed relieved at the question. "After I left, I drifted for a while. Worked odd jobs, mostly construction. Spent too much time drinking. About 3 years ago, I ended up in Denver, where I hit rock bottom. Lost my job, my apartment, everything." He paused. "That's when I finally got help. Entered a recovery program. Got sober, started rebuilding my life. And now," Elena prompted. "Now I have a steady job as a foreman with a construction company in Denver. I've been with them for a year and a half. I have a small apartment, nothing fancy, but it's mine. And I've been trying to be the kind of person who keeps his promises and takes responsibility for his actions." There was a sincerity in his voice. That made Lucia want to believe him, even as her natural skepticism, born from years of disappointment, held her back. "Did you ever think about us?" she asked suddenly. "All those years, did you wonder if we were okay?" David's expression grew pained. "Every day. But I was so ashamed of what I'd done, and then more time passed, and the shame got worse, and it seemed impossible to reach out." He looked directly at her. "That's not an excuse, it's just the truth. I thought about you every single day." Elena's phone chimed with a text message. She glanced at it briefly, then back at David. "Alex is coming over in about 20 minutes to pick us up for our Saturday errands," she said, the information clearly directed at Lucia rather than David. The name seemed to register with David. "Alex Rhodes, from the article?" Elena nodded, her expression neutral. "Yes, he's the CEO of the Rhodes Foundation and a close friend." Something flickered across David's face, perhaps surprise or recognition of how much had changed in their lives, but he quickly composed himself. "I should go then. I don't want to intrude on your plans." He stood up, hesitating. "Would it be possible, could I maybe see you again before I head back to Denver? Just for coffee or something? I understand if the answer is no." Eleanor looked at Lucia again, deferring to her wishes. Lucia felt the weight of the decision, torn between curiosity about this man who shared her blood and fear of opening herself to potential new hurt. "Maybe," she said finally. "I need to think about it." David nodded, accepting this tentative response with visible gratitude. "Of course. Take all the time you need." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, setting it on the coffee table. "My cell number is on there. I'm staying at the Westside Hotel for the next 3 days, if you decide you want to talk." As he moved toward the door, he paused, looking at Lucia with an expression that mingled regret and pride. "The article mentioned your mural at the center. It sounds incredible. You always loved to draw, even as a tiny thing. You'd scribble these elaborate pictures and tell me stories about them." A sad smile crossed his face. "I'm glad you kept that part of yourself alive." With that, he left, the door closing quietly behind him. The apartment fell into heavy silence as Elena and Lucia processed what had just happened. The ghost that had haunted the edges of their lives for years had suddenly materialized, solid and real and imperfect. "Are you all right?" Eleanor asked softly, reaching for Lucia's hand. Lucia nodded, then shook her head, then shrugged, the confused sequence of gestures perfectly capturing her jumbled emotions. "I don't know. I always thought I'd feel something specific if I ever saw him again. Anger or happiness or something clear. But it's all mixed up." "That's completely normal," Elena assured her. "There's no right way to feel about something like this." "What about you?" Lucia asked, studying her mother's composed face. "Are you okay?" Elena sighed, allowing some of her own confusion to show. "Like you said, it's all mixed up. I'm angry that he thinks he can walk back into our lives after all this time. I'm relieved to know he's gotten help and is doing better. I'm worried about how this affects you." She squeezed Lucia's hand. "But mostly, I want you to know that whatever you decide about seeing him again, I'll support you. This is your choice." The doorbell rang again, Alex arriving early. Eleanor answered it, quickly explaining the situation in a low voice that Lucia could still hear from where she sat. "David came back? Today?" Alex's surprised response carried clearly into the living room. "Are you both all right? Do you need me to come back later?" "No, he's gone now," Elena assured him. "We could actually use a little normalcy. Our usual Saturday plans would be perfect if you're still available." Alex entered the living room, his concerned gaze immediately finding Lucia. Unlike David's sudden appearance, Alex's presence felt solid and reassuring, a cornerstone of their new life rather than a ghost from the past. "Rough morning, huh?" he said simply, sitting on the coffee table in front of her, his tone free of condescension or forced cheer. Lucia nodded, grateful for his straightforward approach. "Yeah, really weird. I can imagine. Finding out my father is actually alive and relatively functional would definitely qualify as weird in my book." The gentle humor in his voice drew a small smile from Lucia. "He's staying at a hotel for 3 days," she said. "He wants to see us again before he leaves." Alex nodded thoughtfully. "And how do you feel about that?" Lucia appreciated that he didn't offer advice or opinions, but simply asked how she felt. "Confused. Part of me wants to know more about him, about why he left and where he's been, but another part thinks maybe it's better to leave the past in the past." "Those are both perfectly reasonable reactions," Alex assured her, "and the good news is you don't have to decide right this second. You can take your time." The simple permission to not have an immediate answer was exactly what Lucia needed. She felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "How about this?" Alex suggested, looking between Lucia and Elena. "Let's stick with our original plan for today. Grocery shopping, lunch, that exhibit at the Science Museum you wanted to see. Give yourselves a chance to process this unexpected development. Then tomorrow you can revisit the question with clearer heads." The practical suggestion appealed to Lucia's sense of order. "Okay, that sounds good." As they gathered their things to leave, Lucia noticed David's business card still sitting on the coffee table. After a moment's hesitation, she picked it up and slipped it into her pocket. Not a decision, just a possibility preserved for later consideration. What she didn't realize was that both Elena and Alex had observed this small gesture, exchanging a glance of shared understanding over her head. The past had arrived unexpectedly at their door, and whatever Lucia decided about David's place in her future would fundamentally shape the next chapter of all their lives. The following day dawned grey and drizzly, matching Lucia's contemplative mood. She had slept poorly, her dreams filled with fragments of memories and imagined scenarios involving her father. By morning she was no closer to deciding whether she wanted to see him again before he returned to Denver. Eleanor, attuned to her daughter's struggle, suggested they spend a quiet day at home. They made pancakes together, watched old movies on the couch, and carefully avoided discussing David directly, though his presence hovered in their thoughts like the clouds outside their windows. By late afternoon, Lucia felt restless. She needed space to think, away from her mother's concerned glances. "I think I'm going to go work on the mural for a while," she announced. "Isabella left me the key so I could put in some extra hours this weekend if I wanted to." Elena looked up from her book, clearly weighing the request. The educational center was only a short bus ride away, and Lucia had been going there independently for weeks now. Still, after yesterday's emotional upheaval, Elena seemed hesitant. "I'll have my phone with me the whole time," Lucia promised, "and I'll text you when I arrive and before I leave." "All right," Elena agreed finally, "but be home before dark. Please, and if you need me for any reason, I'll call right away," Lucia finished with a small smile. "I know, Mom." The journey to the center gave Lucia the mental space she craved. The nearly completed building stood quiet and empty on the Sunday afternoon, the construction workers and design teams all absent until Monday. Using the key Isabella had entrusted to her, Lucia let herself in through a side entrance and made her way to the butterfly garden. The atrium was a world transformed. What had once been bare concrete was now a lush tropical environment, with pathways winding through carefully arranged plants and small water features. The massive skylight above was beaded with raindrops, creating a diffuse, dreamy quality to the light that filled the space. Lucia's mural dominated the entrance wall, its colors vibrant against the surrounding greenery. She set up her paints and brushes, focusing on a section of background that needed subtle shading to create depth. The familiar motions of painting soon absorbed her, allowing her mind to process her conflicted feelings about her father, while her hands worked almost automatically. She had been working for nearly an hour when she heard footsteps approaching on the stone pathway. Assuming it was a security guard making rounds, Lucia called out, "It's just me, Lucia Martin. Isabella gave me permission to work today." "Lucia?" The voice that responded wasn't a security guard's. Lucia's brush froze, mid-stroke as she recognized her father's voice. She turned slowly to find David standing at the entrance to the garden, looking as surprised to see her as she was to see him. "What are you doing here?" she asked, instinctively clutching her paintbrush tighter. David held up his hands in a placating gesture. "I'm not following you, I promise. I saw the article about the center and I just wanted to see it for myself. The guard at the gate recognized me from the construction crew. I mentioned I used to work in the industry and we got talking. He let me in to look around." He gestured toward the mural. "I had no idea you'd be here." Lucia studied him suspiciously, but his explanation seemed genuine. "How did you get past the entrance? The building's locked." "Side door was propped open," David explained. "Probably by you, I'm guessing. I just followed the signs to the butterfly garden." He looked around the space with genuine appreciation. "It's incredible, the whole concept." An awkward silence fell between them. Lucia turned back to her mural, adding a few careful brush strokes to the section she'd been working on, hyper-aware of David watching her. "Your work is beautiful," he said finally. "You've got real talent, Lucia." "Thanks," she replied automatically, not looking back at him. More silence stretched between them. Lucia continued painting, hoping he might take the hint and leave, yet paradoxically feeling a growing curiosity about this man who shared her blood but was essentially a stranger. "I should go," David said after a few minutes. "I didn't mean to interrupt your work." As he turned to leave, Lucia found herself speaking before she had consciously decided to. "Why did you really leave?" David stopped, his back to her for a long moment before he slowly turned around. "What did your mother tell you?" "That you couldn't handle the responsibility of a family, that you chose alcohol over us." Lucia set down her brush, facing him directly. "Is that true?" David sighed heavily, moving to sit on a nearby bench positioned to view the mural. "Yes and no. The alcohol was definitely part of it. I was drinking too much, had been for years. But it was more complicated than that." He stared at his hands. "I was diagnosed with depression after you were born. I tried medication, but it made me feel numb, so I self-medicated with alcohol instead. That made everything worse. I couldn't hold down a steady job. Your mother was supporting us mostly on her own." Lucia hadn't known any of this. Eleanor had rarely spoken about David in detail, answering Lucia's childhood questions with age-appropriate simplicity rather than the more complex reality. "I convinced myself you'd both be better off without me," David continued. "That I was dragging you down. That was the depression talking, I understand now, but at the time it seemed logical." He looked up at her, his eyes pained. "It wasn't until years later, when I got proper treatment, that I realized how selfish and destructive my choice was, how much it must have hurt you both." Lucia processed this information slowly. It didn't excuse what he had done, but it helped her understand it, to see her father as a flawed, struggling human rather than the villain or hero she had alternately imagined him to be. "Mom never said anything about depression," she said. Finally. "She might not have fully understood it herself," David admitted. "I wasn't good at talking about it. Men of my generation weren't taught to discuss mental health, and I hid a lot of my struggles from her, tried to pretend everything was fine until I couldn't anymore." Lucia moved to sit on the opposite end, so of the bench, maintaining distance between them but opening herself to the conversation. "What was I like when I was little?" The question seemed to surprise David, but his expression softened with genuine warmth. "You were amazing. So curious about everything. You'd point at objects and demand their names. What dat, what dat? all day long until we were exhausted." He smiled at the memory. "And stubborn. God, were you stubborn. Once you decided something, that was it. No changing your mind." "Mom says I still have that quality," Lucia admitted, a small smile tugging at her lips despite herself. "Fa, you were also incredibly kind," David continued. "Even as a tiny thing, you'd notice if someone was upset. You'd bring your favorite teddy bear to anyone who looked sad, insisting they needed it more than you did." These glimpses into her younger self, parts of her history she had no way of remembering, were precious, even coming from the man who had abandoned her. They filled in blank spaces in the story of her life. "When did you start drinking?" she asked, shifting to a more difficult topic. David didn't shy away from the question. "In college. It was social at first, but then it became a way to quiet my mind when the anxious thoughts got too loud. By the time I met your mother, it was already a problem, though I hid it pretty well. After you were born, when the depression hit hard, it escalated." "Are you really sober now for 2 years?" He nodded. 2 years, 3 months, and 14 days. I go to meetings 3 times a week. Have a sponsor who keeps me accountable. It's not easy, but it's worth it." They talked for nearly an hour, the conversation flowing more naturally as time passed. Lucia asked questions about her early childhood, about David's life now, about his recovery journey. His answers seemed honest and straightforward, neither minimizing his failures nor exaggerating his progress. As the afternoon light began to fade, Lucia realized she needed to head home before Elena grew worried. She packed up her paints and cleaned her brushes, while David watched in respectful silence. "Thank you," he said as she prepared to leave, "for talking to me. I know you didn't have to." Lucia nodded, still uncertain about her feelings, but no longer quite so conflicted. "I'm glad we talked too. It helps to understand more about what happened." "Would it be okay if I called you sometimes?" David asked, his voice carefully neutral, making it clear he would accept whatever answer she gave. "Just to check in, see how you're doing? No pressure for anything more than that." Lucia considered the request. A month ago, even a week ago, she might have said no automatically, protecting herself from potential disappointment. But something had shifted in her perspective. Perhaps it was the confidence that came from creating the mural, or the security of knowing that she and her mother were on solid ground now, or simply the natural process of growing up and seeing the world in less black and white terms. "I think that would be okay," she said finally. "Maybe we could start with emails. That might be easier." The relief and gratitude in David's expression was unmistakable. "Emails would be perfect, whatever you're comfortable with." As they parted, ways outside the center, David heading back to his hotel, Lucia to the bus stop, neither of them noticed the black sedan parked across the street or the camera capturing their interaction through its tinted windows. It wasn't until 3 days later, when the photos appeared in a sensationalized article in the city's tabloid newspaper, "Exclusive Foundation Princess's Secret Meetings with Estranged Father," that Lucia would realize their private reconciliation had become very public, and that the careful boundaries she and her mother had established around their personal story had been breached in the most invasive way. The tabloid article exploded like a bomb in Lucia's carefully reconstructed life. What had been a private, tentative reconnection with her father became fodder for public speculation almost overnight. The article painted a lurid picture of the poor girl who had once collected bottles for pennies, now living in luxury thanks to her mother's relationship with millionaire philanthropist Alexander Rhodes. It described David as the deadbeat dad returning just as his ex-family strikes gold, implying with little subtlety that he had come back only for financial gain. Worst of all, it included not just the photographs of Lucia and David at the educational center, but older images somehow obtained from their past. Elena and Lucia standing in a free meal line at a community center years ago, their old apartment building with its crumbling facade, even Lucia collecting recyclables in the park. Helena had tried to shield Lucia from the worst of it, but in the age of social media, such protection was impossible. By the time Lucia arrived at school the Monday after the article appeared, everyone had seen it. The whispers followed her through the hallways, the stairs tracking her movements in the cafeteria. Even teachers looked at her differently, their expressions ranging from pitying to awkwardly sympathetic. "Is it true you used to be homeless?" one classmate asked directly during math class, the question carrying clearly across the suddenly silent room. "We were never homeless," Lucia had replied stiffly, keeping her eyes on her textbook. "We just didn't have much money." "My dad says your mom is only with Mr. Rhodes for his money," another student commented in the hallway between classes, loud enough for Lucia and several others to hear. Those words had hurt more than any others, cutting to the heart of Lucia's deepest insecurities. Eleanor and Alex had been blindsided by the article as well, their private relationship suddenly thrust into public scrutiny. Alex had immediately engaged the Foundation's legal team to address the privacy violations and inaccuracies in the story. But the damage was already spreading through secondary articles and social media commentary. By Friday, Lucia felt like a specimen under glass, observed and discussed but somehow not quite real to those around her. The sanctuary of the educational center and her mural work had been compromised as well. The construction site had implemented stricter security after the photograph incident, and Lucia now needed an escort to access the butterfly garden. Eleanor had reached out to David immediately after the article appeared, concerned that he might have been involved in selling the story. His genuine shock and anger had convinced her of his innocence, an assessment confirmed when a follow-up piece included unflattering details about his past that he would never have willingly disclosed. Friday afternoon found Lucia slumped on the couch in their apartment, having skipped her scheduled mural work session. The grand opening of the center was just 10 days away, but for the first time since the project began, she felt no excitement about it, only dread at the thought of standing before cameras and curious onlookers, who now believed they knew intimate details of her life. The apartment door opened, and Eleanor entered looking tired but determined. She had spent the day in meetings with the Foundation's public relations team, developing a strategy to address the tabloid story without giving it additional oxygen. "Alex is on his way over," she announced, setting down her briefcase. "He thinks he's identified the source of the leak, a new security guard at the center who recognized David from the construction industry and put two and two together. Apparently the tabloid paid him quite well for the tip and the access." Lucia nodded dully, unsurprised. The betrayal felt almost expected at this point, one more breach in the walls they had carefully built around their private life. Elena sat beside her daughter, taking her hand. "How was school today?" "The same," Lucia replied with a small shrug. "Some people stare, some people whisper, some people ask questions I don't want to answer." Eleanor's face tightened with maternal concern. "We could look into different options, you know. There's a very good private school near the Foundation headquarters, or homeschooling, if you'd prefer." "I don't want to run away," Lucia interrupted, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "That would just make it seem like we have something to be ashamed of. We don't." Pride flashed in Elena's eyes. "You're right. We don't." She squeezed Lucia's hand. "I'm so sorry this is happening, mi vida. This kind of public exposure is exactly what I was trying to protect you from." The doorbell rang, signaling Alex's arrival. When Elena let him in, Lucia was struck by how exhausted he looked, the usual easy confidence in his bearing replaced by a tense alertness. "How are my two favorite people holding up?" he asked, his attempt at casual normalcy not quite masking his concern. "We're managing," Elena replied, accepting his brief kiss on the cheek. "What news from the legal team?" Alex settled into the armchair across from them, loosening his tie with a weary gesture. "They've sent a formal cease and desist to the tabloid, demanding a retraction of the most egregious inaccuracies. But frankly, the damage is already done." He looked at Lucia apologetically. "I'm so sorry, Lucia. The Foundation should have had better security protocols in place." "It's not your fault," she assured him automatically, though part of her wanted to blame someone, anyone, for the upheaval in her life. "The PR team has prepared a statement," Alex continued, addressing Elena now. "Very brief, simply confirming that yes, the Martin family faced economic challenges in the past. Yes, Elena now works for the Rhodes Foundation, and yes, the Foundation's mission to support families in similar circumstances is deeply personal to her. No details, no defensiveness, no fuel for further speculation." Elena nodded her approval of this approach. And what about the opening ceremony? Should we delay it until this dies down? Alex shook his head firmly. Absolutely not. The center is too important to too many people. If we postpone, it just gives the impression that there's something to hide. The best response is to move forward with dignity and focus on the mission, not the gossip. As the adults discussed strategies for navigating the public relations challenge, Lucia felt a growing sense of disconnect. They were talking about media statements and legal options, but none of that addressed the fundamental reality that had been exposed, the stark contrast between who she had been and who she was now. "I want to change the mural," she announced, suddenly interrupting their conversation. Both adults turned to her in surprise. "Change it? But it's almost finished," Elena said. "Not completely change it," Lucia clarified. "Just add something important." Alex leaned forward, his expression curious rather than dismissive. "What did you have in mind?" "Right now, the mural shows a girl releasing butterflies that turn into birds," Lucia explained, the idea taking clearer shape as she spoke. "It's about transformation and hope. But I want to add where the butterflies came from." She reached for her sketchbook on the coffee table and quickly outlined her vision. Cocoons hanging from branches at the bottom of the mural, some still closed, others in the process of opening, showing the struggle of emergence. "The butterflies don't just appear," she continued. "They have to fight their way out of darkness first. That's what makes their flight possible." Alex and Elena exchanged a glance of shared understanding. "You want to acknowledge the struggle," Alex said softly, "not hide it." Lucia nodded, suddenly passionate about this evolution of her design. "Everyone's talking about our past like it's something shameful, but it's not. It's what made us who we are. Mom taught me to keep going when things seemed impossible, to find beauty even when life was hard. That's what I want the mural to show." Elena's eyes glistened with tears as she pulled Lucia into a tight embrace. "When did you get so wise, mi vida?" "I had a good teacher," Lucia murmured against her mother's shoulder. When they separated, Alex was looking at them both with a mixture of admiration and resolve. "I think your addition to the mural is exactly what the center needs, Lucia, and it's given me an idea for how we might address this situation more directly." He outlined his proposal, rather than simply issuing a terse statement and hoping the story would fade. They could choose to own their narrative more explicitly, not by sharing every private detail, but by acknowledging the journey that had brought them to this point and connecting it directly to the mission of the foundation. The center's purpose is to support families facing challenges similar to what you experienced, Alex pointed out. Who better to speak to the importance of that work than someone who lived it firsthand? The suggestion gave Lucia pause. For so long she had compartmentalized her life into before and after, keeping the hardships of her earlier years carefully separated from her present reality. The idea of deliberately connecting those worlds, of standing before an audience, and claiming both parts of her story, was both terrifying and strangely liberating. "What do you think, Lucia?" Elena asked, clearly unwilling to proceed without her daughter's full agreement. "This would be your choice. We can still issue the brief statement and focus on protecting your privacy if that's what you prefer." Lucia thought about the cocoons she had just sketched, the necessary struggle that preceded flight. She thought about the other children, who might someday visit the center, facing their own versions of the challenges she had overcome. And she thought about the words Isabella's grandmother had spoken that night on the rooftop terrace. "A man who recognizes a daughter's place in her mother's heart is a man who understands family." Family, not just Eleanor and herself, the tight unit of two that had sustained them through the hardest times, but the expanded circle that now included Alex, whose steady presence had become fundamental to their lives. Perhaps even David, finding his way toward a healthier relationship with his daughter, and beyond them, the broader concept of community represented by the Foundation's work. "I think," Lucia said slowly, "that we should tell our own story. Not all of it. Some things are just for us, but enough to show why the center matters, why it's more than just a building with my mom's name on it." The relief and pride in Elena's expression confirmed that Lucia had made the right choice. Alex nodded approvingly, already making notes on his phone about the approach they would take. As the evening progressed, their discussion evolved from crisis management to a more purposeful consideration of how their personal experience could inform and strengthen the Foundation's mission. The tabloids' invasion of their privacy still stung, but they were reclaiming the narrative, transforming exposure into authentic connection. What none of them could have anticipated was how this decision would reshape not just the opening ceremony, but the future of the Foundation itself, or that the greatest challenge to Lucia's newfound resolve would come not from external scrutiny, but from an unexpected revelation that would test the very foundation of trust they had worked so hard to build. The morning of the Elena Martin Educational Center's opening ceremony dawned clear and crisp, with autumn sunshine illuminating the changing leaves in the park across from Lucia and Elena's apartment. Inside, the atmosphere was charged with a mixture of nervous energy and quiet determination as they prepared for the day ahead. Lucia stood before her bedroom mirror, studying her reflection in the new dress Elena had bought for the occasion, a deep teal that brought out the warm tones in her skin and dark eyes. Her hair, usually worn in a simple ponytail, had been styled into an elegant braid by Elena, with a few soft tendrils framing her face. She looked older somehow, more composed than the girl who had entered Bellamy and Rhodes nearly a year ago with a pouch of coins and a desperate hope. That Lucia seemed simultaneously very far away and intimately present, a ghost of her former self that had transformed not by disappearing, but by being fully incorporated into who she was becoming. The past 10 days had been intense, but unexpectedly healing. After deciding to address the tabloid story directly, Elena and Lucia had worked closely with the Foundation's team to craft a message that acknowledged their journey without exploiting it. They had given a single, carefully controlled interview to a respected journalist, focusing on how their experience informed their commitment to the Foundation's mission rather than dwelling on the hardships themselves. The response had been overwhelmingly positive. Other media outlets had picked up the story, framing it as an inspiring example of resilience rather than tabloid fodder. The narrative had shifted from speculation about Alex's motives to genuine interest in the educational programs Elena had developed. Amidst this whirlwind, Lucia had completed her mural, adding the cocoons at the base as she had envisioned, subtle but powerful symbols of the transformation that was at the heart of their story. Isabella had been enthusiastic about the addition, helping Lucia integrate it seamlessly into the original design. David had reached out after the tabloid story broke, concerned about the impact on Lucia and offering to make a public statement clarifying his role. After careful consideration, they had declined, preferring to keep his re-emergence in their lives separate from the Foundation's public narrative. He had respected this decision, continuing the tentative email communication with Lucia without pressing for more than she was ready to give. A soft knock at her bedroom door drew Lucia from her reflections. "Come in," she called, turning from the mirror. Eleanor entered, looking elegant in a simple navy dress with the silver swallow pendant gleaming at her throat. She paused in the doorway, her eyes brightening at the sight of her daughter. "Oh, mi vida," she said softly. "You look beautiful." Lucia smiled, a touch of shyness in her expression. "So do you, Mom. Is that a new dress?" "Alex's idea," Eleanor admitted with a small laugh. "He thought we should both have something special for today." She crossed the room to stand behind Lucia, their reflections side by side in the mirror. "Are you nervous?" "A little," Lucia confessed. "Not about the ceremony itself, but—" She hesitated, trying to articulate the feeling. "It's like after... Today everything changes. The center won't just be a construction site or a project anymore. It'll be real." Eleanor nodded in understanding. "Beginnings are always a little scary, but this one has been built on such a strong foundation." The pride in her mother's voice warmed Lucia. They had both grown so much over the past year, finding strength neither had known they possessed. "Alex just texted," Eleanor continued, checking her phone. "The car will be here in 15 minutes. Are you ready?" Lucia took a deep breath, smoothing her hands down the front of her dress. "I think so, just need my shoes." As she slipped on the simple ballet flats that completed her outfit, Lucia thought about the people who would be present for the ceremony. The foundation board members and major donors, local officials and education partners, Isabella and her family, and somewhere in the crowd, David, who had asked permission to attend without drawing attention to himself. The drive to the center passed in a blur of anticipation. When they arrived, Alex was waiting for them at a private entrance, his face lighting up at the sight of Eleanor and Lucia emerging from the car. "The two guests of honor," he greeted them warmly, offering an arm to each. "Everything is ready. The butterfly garden looks magnificent, and the first guests are already arriving." The next hour was a flurry of final preparations and preliminary introductions. Lucia stayed close to her mother, drawing confidence from Elena's composure. As they greeted board members and community leaders, the formal ceremony would take place in the central courtyard, followed by guided tours of the facility and a reception in the butterfly garden. As the scheduled start time approached, Alex led them to a small waiting area adjacent to the courtyard. Through the windows, Lucia could see hundreds of chairs arranged in neat rows, now filling with attendees. A raised platform held a podium and several seats for the ceremony's key participants. "Are you both ready?" Alex asked, his expression becoming more serious. "Remember, if at any point you feel uncomfortable with the attention, just give me the signal we discussed and I'll redirect the focus." Elena reached for his hand, squeezing it gratefully. "We're ready. And thank you, Alex, for everything." The look that passed between them held such depth of feeling that Lucia felt like an intruder witnessing it. Over the months, she had watched their relationship develop from cautious friendship to something profound and mutually supportive. The gossip suggesting Eleanor was with Alex for his money couldn't have been further from the truth. They had built something authentic and equal, each bringing their own strength to the partnership. At precisely 11 o'clock, the Foundation's communications director appeared to escort them to the platform. Lucia felt a flutter of nerves as she stepped into the sunshine and saw the size of the crowd, but it faded as she focused on the familiar faces in the front row: Isabella and her family, several of Elena's colleagues, even Mrs. Peterson from their old neighborhood, specially invited for the occasion. She stood to the side with Isabella, watching as people absorbed the imagery. The cocoons at the base of the composition, the emerging butterflies stretching delicate wings, their forms gradually transforming into birds as they soared upward, carrying dreams on widespread wings. "It's perfect," Isabella whispered, squeezing Lucia's shoulder. "The cocoons complete it." Alex had arranged for the garden's butterfly inhabitants to be released just before the reception. As guests entered the atrium, they were greeted with the magical sight of hundreds of colorful butterflies taking their first flights among the tropical plants, some alighting on flowers, others exploring their new home with delicate, uncertain movements. The symbolism was lost on no one. Like the butterflies, the center itself was just beginning its journey. Like the children it would serve, it held unlimited potential. And like the Martin family, it had transformed from vision to reality through determination, support, and unwavering hope. As the reception continued around her, Lucia found a quiet moment to stand before her completed mural, absorbing the full impact of what she had created. A year ago, she could never have imagined this moment. Her art displayed prominently in a building bearing her mother's name, their story no longer a burden to be hidden, but a source of strength to be shared. Helena joined her, slipping an arm around her daughter's waist. "It's magnificent, mi vida. You should be so proud." "I am," Lucia replied honestly, "not just of the mural, but of us, of everything we've been through together." They stood in companionable silence, watching as butterflies occasionally fluttered past, some even landing briefly on the mural as if recognizing kindred spirits in the painted images. Alex approached, his expression warm with affection for them both. "The board members are absolutely blown away by the mural, Lucia, and your speech. Several of them are already talking about commissioning artwork for other foundation properties." Lucia smiled, pleased by the recognition, but even more gratified by the knowledge that her work might continue to spread the message of transformation and hope. "There's something I'd like to discuss with both of you," Alex continued, his tone becoming slightly more serious. Not right now with all this happening, but perhaps tomorrow when things have settled down. Eleanor gave him a curious look. Is everything all right? Everything is perfect, he assured her quickly. It's just, well, I've been doing some thinking about the future. Our future specifically. The meaningful emphasis in his voice made his intention clear. Lucia felt a momentary flutter of surprise, followed by a spreading warmth. She had suspected for some time that Alex's feelings for her mother were heading in this direction, but hearing it suggested so directly was still a significant moment. Before either she or Elena could respond, they were interrupted by the Foundation's events coordinator, needing Elena for photographs with major donors. As her mother was led away, Lucia found herself alone with Alex for the first time that day. I hope I didn't speak out of turn, he said quietly, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. I had planned to wait until after the ceremony to mention anything but seeing the two of you together, looking at what you've created. It's okay, Lucia interrupted gently. I'm glad you said something. Alex studied her face, clearly wanting to be sure of her feelings. Your mother's happiness is the most important thing to me, Lucia, but yours is a very close second. Whatever happens next, I want you to know that. The sincerity in his voice confirmed what Lucia had come to believe over the past year, that Alex Rhodes was a man of integrity who had entered their lives not as a savior or a substitute, but as a genuine partner who valued them for exactly who they were. I know, she assured him with a smile, and for what it's worth, I think Mom is happier with you in our lives than I've seen her in a very long time. Relief and gratitude washed over Alex's face. He opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted by the arrival of David, who had been keeping a respectful distance throughout the ceremony, but now approached cautiously. I don't want to intrude, he said, stopping a few feet away. I just wanted to congratulate Lucia on the mural. It's extraordinary. Alex, to his credit, showed no surprise or discomfort at David's appearance. You must be proud of your daughter, he said simply, extending his hand. I'm Alex Rhodes. David Martin, he replied, accepting the handshake. And yes, incredibly proud, though I can't take any credit for the remarkable young woman she's become. The two men, so different in circumstance yet now connected through their relationships with Lucia, regarded each other with cautious respect. The ceremony began with welcome remarks from the city's mayor, followed by brief comments from the Foundation's board chair. Alex then took the podium, speaking eloquently about the vision behind the center and its mission to support children and families facing medical and educational challenges. When my grandfather established this foundation, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard, he believed that talent and potential exist everywhere, but opportunity does not. The Elena Martin Educational Center represents our commitment to bridging that gap, to ensuring that circumstances of birth or health never determine a child's access to learning and growth. He paused, his gaze finding Elena and Lucia where they sat on the platform. I can think of no better namesake for this center than Elena Martin, whose innovative educational programs have already transformed how we support children in medical crisis. Her vision, compassion, and first-hand understanding of the challenges these families face have made our work immeasurably more effective. The crowd applauded warmly as Alex gestured for Elena to join him at the podium. She rose gracefully, her expression composed though Lucia could detect the emotion beneath the surface. Thank you, Alex, and thank you to the Rhodes Foundation for this extraordinary honor, Elena began, her voice steady and clear. When I accepted the position as Educational Programs Director last year, I could never have imagined standing here today, seeing my name on this beautiful building. She went on to outline the center's programs, the remote learning options for hospitalized children, the support services for families navigating medical and educational systems simultaneously, the resources for schools to better accommodate students with chronic health conditions. As she spoke, her natural passion for education shone through, transforming what might have been a formal presentation into an inspiring call to action. Every child deserves the chance to learn, to grow, to dream, she concluded. Even, perhaps, especially, when facing life's greatest challenges. This center exists to ensure they have that chance. As the applause rose again, Elena returned to her seat beside Lucia, giving her daughter's hand a reassuring squeeze. Now it was Lucia's turn. Alex introduced her with evident pride. One of the center's most striking features is the mural that graces the entrance to our butterfly garden. Created by a remarkable young artist who knows firsthand the journey from adversity to opportunity, it captures the very essence of what we hope to achieve here. Please welcome Lucia Martin. Lucia approached the podium, her heart pounding but her steps steady. She had rehearsed what she wanted to say, keeping it brief but meaningful. Looking out at the sea of faces, she found Isabella, who gave her an encouraging thumbs up. When I was asked to create a mural for the butterfly garden, Lucia began, her voice quieter than her mother's, but gaining strength as she continued, I knew I wanted to show transformation. Butterflies becoming birds, taking flight toward new possibilities. She paused, gathering her thoughts, but as I worked on it, I realized something was missing. The butterflies didn't just appear, ready to fly. They had to struggle out of darkness. First, they had to break free from cocoons that both protected and confined them. The crowd had grown completely silent, attentive to every word from this unexpectedly poised young speaker. My mom and I know about that struggle, Lucia continued. We've lived it, but we also know that what comes after, the flight, the freedom, the chance to become something new, makes the struggle worthwhile. She looked directly at her mother now, their gazes locking across the distance. The Elena Martin Educational Center isn't named for my mom because of what she has. It's named for her because of what she gives. Hope, guidance, and the absolute certainty that every challenge can be overcome with the right support. The applause that followed her short speech seemed disproportionate to its length, but Lucia understood that the audience was responding not just to her words, but to the authentic emotion behind them. As she returned to her seat, she caught sight of David in the crowd, his eyes bright with unshed tears and unmistakable pride. The remainder of the ceremony proceeded smoothly, a ribbon cutting at the center's main entrance, the official unveiling of the building's name on its facade, and finally, the moment Lucia had been anticipating, the opening of the butterfly garden to invited guests. As attendees moved from the courtyard to the garden entrance, excited murmurs rippled through the crowd at the first glimpse of Lucia's mural. In that moment, Lucia realized that the cocoons in her mural represented not just her past struggles, but the protective constraints of her own fears and expectations. True transformation required the courage to break free of those limitations, to embrace the complexity of human relationships in all their imperfect beauty. As the reception continued around them, Lucia stood between these two men who represented such different aspects of her life, the biological father seeking redemption and the potential stepfather who had earned her trust through consistent action. Neither was perfect, just as she and her mother were not perfect, but together they formed a constellation of connection that felt surprisingly right. The future would undoubtedly bring new challenges and changes. Alex's hints about their future suggested major developments ahead. David's presence represented a complex reconciliation, still in its early stages. The center itself would soon be filled with children and families navigating their own difficult journeys. But standing in the butterfly garden, surrounded by the literal and metaphorical evidence of transformation, Lucia felt ready for whatever came next. Like the butterflies emerging from their cocoons, she and her mother had not merely survived their struggles, they had been fundamentally transformed by them, gaining strength and purpose that would carry them forward on newfound wings. 1 year later, Lucia stood on the balcony of the family's new home, watching the sunset paint the city skyline in hues of gold and purple. The spacious colonial-style house sat on a tree-lined street halfway between Elena and Alex's offices, with a backyard studio where Lucia could work on her increasingly frequent art commissions. They had moved in 3 months after Alex and Elena's intimate wedding ceremony, blending their lives with the same thoughtful intention that characterized everything they did together. The transition had been surprisingly smooth. Alex had been careful not to rush the process, giving both Elena and Lucia time to adjust to each new development. When he had formally proposed the morning after the center's opening ceremony, he had made it clear that while he hoped to become Lucia's stepfather, he had no intention of replacing her biological father or pressuring her to change their relationship in any way she wasn't comfortable with. David had remained a consistent presence in Lucia's life, though at a careful distance. Monthly emails had evolved into occasional phone calls and quarterly visits when his work brought him to the city. He had maintained his sobriety recently, celebrating 3 years without alcohol, and had slowly begun rebuilding trust with both his daughter and his ex-wife. He and Alex had developed a cordial relationship based on their shared concern for Lucia's well-being, navigating the potentially awkward situation with remarkable maturity. The Elena Martin Educational Center had flourished in its first year of operation, serving over 500 families facing medical and educational challenges. Elena's programs had gained national recognition, with several other cities implementing similar models. The Butterfly Garden had become a beloved sanctuary not just for the center's participants, but for community members who visited during its public hours. As for Lucia, now 14 and in her first year of high school, the changes in her external circumstances were perhaps less dramatic than the internal growth she had experienced. The frightened, defensive girl who had once hidden her past out of shame had blossomed into a confident young woman who understood that vulnerability could be a source of strength rather than weakness. Her artistic talents had continued to develop, resulting in commissions for murals at 2 additional foundation properties and a local children's hospital. She had also discovered a passion for mentoring younger artists, volunteering on weekends to teach art classes for children at the center, named for her mother. The sound of laughter drifted up from the backyard, where Eleanor and Alex were setting up for the small gathering they were hosting that evening, a celebration of the center's first anniversary and the launch of a new foundation initiative. Isabella and her family would be there, along with key foundation staff and a few close friends. Even David had been invited, a testament to how far they had all come in healing old wounds. Lucia's phone chimed with a text message from her best friend Maya, confirming she was on her way over. They had met at school earlier that year and bonded over shared interests in art and community service. Unlike Lucia's previous friendships, which had been limited by her reluctance to reveal her full story, her relationship with Maya was built on authentic openness from the beginning. As she turned to go back inside and finish getting ready, Lucia caught sight of her reflection in the balcony door's glass. No longer a child, not quite an adult, but unmistakably herself, in a way that transcended circumstance or setting. Whether collecting bottles in the park or painting commissioned murals, whether living in a drafty apartment or this comfortable home, she remained essentially Lucia, determined, creative, and increasingly confident in her place in the world. Downstairs, she found Elena arranging flowers in the dining room, the silver swallow pendant still a constant presence at her throat. Though Elena now owned finer jewelry, including the elegant engagement ring Alex had given her, the pendant remained her most treasured possession, a tangible reminder of her daughter's love and determination. "Need any help, Mum?" Lucia offered, stealing a strawberry from the fruit platter on the table. Eleanor smiled, the happiness in her expression no longer tinged with the worry that had once been her constant companion. "I think we're all set. Alex is firing up the grill, and everything else is ready." Maya just texted. "She'll be here soon," Lucia informed her, reaching for another strawberry only to have her hand playfully swatted away. "Save some for our guests, mi vida," Elena chided with a laugh. "Why don't you go see if Alex needs help in the garden?" Lucia made her way through the French doors to the backyard, where Alex was arranging coals in the large grill he had installed that spring. He looked up at her approach, his face breaking into the warm smile that had become a familiar comfort in her life. "Just in time," he greeted her. "Can you grab the platter of vegetables from the kitchen? I think they're ready to start grilling." As they worked together preparing for the evening's celebration, Lucia reflected on how naturally they had settled into a family rhythm. Alex had never tried to be her father. She already had one of those, however complicated that relationship might be. Instead, he had become something equally valuable, a steadfast presence who had earned his place in their lives through consistent kindness and genuine respect. The guests began arriving shortly after 6, filling the house with the cheerful noise of conversation and laughter. Isabella brought her youngest brother, now considering a career in art himself, inspired partly by Lucia's success. Maya arrived with her parents, who had quickly become friends with Elena and Alex. Foundation colleagues mingled with neighbors and friends, creating a diverse gathering that reflected the interconnected communities that had become such an important part of their lives. David arrived last, bringing a small potted butterfly bush for the garden, a thoughtful gift that acknowledged both Lucia's mural and the new roots they were all establishing. He moved somewhat awkwardly through the gathering at first, but soon found himself engaged in conversation with Alex about the foundation's work and with Isabella's father about construction techniques. As the evening progressed, Alex clinked his glass for attention, gathering everyone around the patio for a toast. Thank you all for coming tonight to celebrate not just the first anniversary of the Elena Martin Educational Center, but the remarkable community that has formed around it, he began, his arm resting lightly across Elena's shoulders. When my grandfather established the Rhodes Foundation, he believed that true philanthropy wasn't about charity, but about opportunity, about creating the conditions for people to transform their own lives. He gestured toward Elena and Lucia. What I've learned from these two extraordinary women is that transformation is never a single event. It's an ongoing process of growth and discovery, of breaking free from limitations both external and self-imposed. Lucia felt a surge of emotion as Alex continued, speaking eloquently about the center's impact and the foundation's expanding vision. A year ago, such public acknowledgement would have made her uncomfortable. Now she understood that their story, while deeply personal, had the power to inspire others facing their own challenges. When Alex finished speaking, Elena stepped forward. "I'd like to add something," she said, her voice clear in the evening air. "A year ago, when the center opened, I spoke about our programs and their importance. Tonight, I want to speak about something more fundamental, the power of community to transform lives." She looked around the gathering, colleagues who had become friends, neighbors who had become extended family, even her ex-husband now finding his way toward a healthier relationship with his daughter. None of us transforms alone. We need others who believe in us, who support us through the struggles that inevitably come with growth. Her gaze settled on Lucia. "My daughter taught me that lesson long before any center bore my name. As a child, she showed me that even in our darkest moments, we were never truly alone. We had each other. Now we're blessed to have all of you as well, each adding your unique thread to the tapestry of connection that sustains us." As conversation resumed and people broke into smaller groups, Lucia found herself standing beside the butterfly bush David had brought, its delicate purple blooms attracting a single monarch butterfly that had found its way into the garden. She watched as it settled on a flower, its wings opening and closing slowly in the evening light. Maya joined her, camera in hand to capture the butterfly's perfect moment of rest amid its perpetual journey. "Your family is amazing," she commented, adjusting her lens for the shot. "Not just your mom and Alex, but all of it. How you've created something so beautiful out of such difficult beginnings." Lucia smiled, appreciating her friend's perception. "We're still creating it, I think. That's the thing about transformation. It's never really finished." As the gathering continued around them, Lucia looked at the assembled guests, her mother and Alex, deep in conversation with foundation colleagues. David, showing Isabella's brother photographs of a building project he was working on in Denver, Maya's parents helping arrange desserts on the patio table. Each person represented a connection formed through authenticity rather than pretense, through sharing their true stories rather than presenting carefully edited versions of themselves. The cocoons that had once confined her, fear, shame, insecurity, had not disappeared entirely. They had been transformed just as she had been transformed into something more expansive and resilient. The struggle to emerge had been real and sometimes painful, but it had strengthened her wings for the flight that followed. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky above, Lucia felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought them here, not despite its difficulties, but because of them. Like the butterflies in her mural, They had emerged from darkness into light, carrying their dreams on newfound wings, and those wings would carry them wherever they needed to go next together.